To all of you that are joining us, I want to say good morning and thank you so much for taking the time. My name is Sydney Vergis, and I'm the Assistant Division Chief at the California Air Resources Board, where I oversee the implementation of our new corporate greenhouse gas reporting and climate-related financial risk disclosure programs. Today marks an important step in our effort to implement the legislature's direction to ensure that consumers and investors have clear, consistent information about corporate climate impacts and risks. I'll just note today that we're joined by a large and diverse group of stakeholders. And while we're still early in the process with a regulation expected later this year, today's workshop begins a dialogue that will shape how these programs take form. We know these issues are complex. We know there's more work ahead, but we're here to listen, learn, and collaborate. Next slide, please. So first, I'd like to cover some workshop logistics. Given the large number of folks that are joining us and have registered for this Zoom webinar, this will be very important. So again, the workshop's being recorded and all workshop materials are available at the link shown on this slide. Today's public workshop is being held fully remotely via Zoom. You'll be able to raise your hand in Zoom to speak during the public comment period. And when it's your turn, the host will ask to unmute you after you push the unmute button and you may begin to speak. We are expecting over 3,000 folks to join us today, so we will be adhering to a 2-minute comment limit. There's certainly other opportunities to connect with us beyond today's workshop. So please feel free to reach out to climatedisclosure@arb.ca.gov. And for transparency, we will, of course, post materials received through that email address to our website. Next slide, please. So I'll run you through the agenda of what we're expecting to accomplish today. We're going to start with some opening remarks from the authors of the climate disclosure bills that we'll be discussing. So we have Senator Scott Wiener and Senator Henry Stern. Then we'll set the stage with some California context. As many of you know, our state has long led on climate policy, and this is another opportunity to build programs that equip consumers, investors, and decision makers with the information they need. We'll provide an overview of the legislation guiding our work, as well as walk through CARB's rulemaking process and how we move from legislation to regulation to implementation. We'll then share a summary of the public comments we've received so far. And thank you so much to everyone who submitted feedback. Your input is really helping us identify key questions, concerns, and areas where we may need to clarify or adjust our approach. We're also pleased to have guest presentations from Montrose Environmental and the UCLA Anderson School of Management, who will share insights from research and practice. And then to close, we'll outline the next steps in our public process, and then, of course, open the floor for your feedback. I do want to emphasize that today, for those of you who are joining us now, that given the large volume of folks that are attending, everything is being recorded. We'll post this recording on our website. And even if you don't have the opportunity to speak or fully convey your questions, comments, or concerns to us, we are always available for meetings. I also want to note that there has been a large interest in this program, not only as indicated by the number of folks attending today, but the large number of public comments that we've received through our public docket when we opened our information solicitation earlier this year. And we're still reviewing that full range of input that we've received. We know that these are complex issues, but we're committed to developing a regulation that is streamlined, sound, and clear. Also, I see that there are a number of hands up already. I want to
Turn your
emphasize.
video on whenever you're ready. It's on.
Oh, hello, Senator Wiener and Stern. Thank you so much for joining us from floor session. We're honored to have you here. Can you please go to the next slide? So with that, I'm really honored to welcome Senator Wiener and Senator Stern. Senator Wiener is the author of SB 253, which is the landmark bill requiring major corporations to publicly disclose their greenhouse gas emissions. Senator, if you'd like to speak to this, we'd be honored.
Great. Thank you for having me and Senator Stern, who is the author of SB 261. And we're just very grateful to CARB for moving the implementation of these bills forward. And we're very grateful to all of the reporting entities for being part of this workshop. This is such an important step for California to continue to be a global leader on climate. And on trying to really understand carbon emissions and how we can get those reduced. It's critical for the future of our planet. And as we especially see from the federal government, an effort to eviscerate any and all forms of climate actions or action or reduction of carbon emissions, and as they push more and more for fossil fuels, it's even more important for California to lead. And so thank you so much to CARB for really proactively moving forward. You have my complete support. We'll continue to work with you. And this is just amazing to have so many people signed up. It really gives me so much hope for the future of California and the future of climate action. So thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Senator Stern.
Well, thank you, Senator Weiner. It's been a long road to get here, but this is a momentous day, and the participation is huge. But I do want to take a step to acknowledge also just the collective effort that it's taken to get here. I'm grateful to my partner here for not just passing the laws, but getting the budget resources ready to make this happen, as well as the advocates who stood by us and submitted the robust comments during this information solicitation, especially groups like Society for Corporate Governance, Ceres, XBRL, and many others from the private sector, especially who weighed in. We want to know what you think, and you've got a great team here led by Dr. Vergis to help look into those issues. We're looking at, we realize that there is ongoing litigation and that there may be some headwinds, but those of you amongst the corporates and others who are recognizing not just the validity of California state law, but that this is going to be useful to you all in a planning exercise to look ahead at risk, to come up with ambitious but also durable reporting frameworks that are going to be able to scale and be interchangeable at a global level. Net zero goals, high quality protocols. These are the things that we're watching really closely in the legislature. I think there are probably 5 continents present on this workshop, and we're aware that a lot of these issues go all around the world. So we want to work with your jurisdictions and civil society organizations to find common ground and implement more coordinated reporting and disclosure frameworks. We continue to get briefings from the EU around the delayed implementation and the rework of the CSRD and the CSDDD, that directive, which does change some of the compliance deadlines, but we want to work collaboratively with our colleagues there as well to ensure that we maintain our ambition and find durable policies that can withstand the headwinds. We're also closely watching the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and more than 30 other jurisdictions around the world. We're looking very closely at those ISSB standards that have become sort of a center point at a global level for multiple jurisdictions to look to for guidance. We're planning to travel to Europe this summer and meet with some of our counterparts, both in the EU and the UK, and civil society groups and various commissions. So we're going to be taking this show on the road as well. But for today, we just want to make sure that you all have a really robust workshop, that we have the kind of transparency we're looking for, and that we put corporations, especially those who do business in California, in a good footing to not fly blind into the headwinds of really material climate risk and supply chain risk at a crucial moment, and that you all find this to actually help with your bottom line. So for all that, we thank you and look forward to staying engaged.
Great. And if I could just add one thing, because there's been a lot of press coverage and conversation about timetables on the bill, and I know CARB is working really hard in a public process to produce the regulations this year. Under SB 253, The scope 1 and 2 disclosures will begin next year, 2026, and then scope 3 in 2027. Those timetables are holding firm. Those are the timetables. So scope 1 and 2 in 2026, scope 3 in 2027. And we're really excited about that and really look forward to it. It's incredibly important. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. And I'll just note Senator Stern, in addition to being the author of SB 261, is also our ex officio board member for the CARB board. So thank you for your service and continued interest in this space. Thank you, both of you. And thank you for joining us from floor session. I know it's not easy to escape. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Montrose.
All right, so thank you so much to our speakers for being here today and also putting into context as to why this legislation is important for consumers and investors. So for those of you who may be new to interacting with CARB, by way of introduction, CARB is the state agency responsible for protecting public health through clean air programs and reducing climate pollution. Our work spans air quality, greenhouse gas reduction, and clean transportation using science, data, and regulation to drive progress. CARB's authority dates back to 1967, and we've led on issues like smog reduction, zero-emission vehicles, and now corporate climate disclosures under the 200s, Senate Bills 253, 261, and 219. Next slide. So over the decades, we've worked under Republican and Democratic governors, different legislative bodies, across evolving scientific understanding and economic conditions. And this history shows that climate and clean air progress is not new, not radical, and not partisan. This is really California's tradition. And polls continue to show that Californians care about clean air and climate change. And we've begun implementing these new bills, and we're building on that legacy. So as we go to the next slide, I'm turning over the next part of this presentation to Johnny Raymond, who will talk about these bills. Johnny?
Thank you, Dr. Vergis. Much appreciated. California has long been a leader in climate policy, beginning with AB 32 in 2006, which set the state's first economy-wide emission reduction target. We not only met the goal, reducing emissions to 1990 levels by 2020, we exceeded it. But our work continues. California has since adopted even more ambitious targets, cutting greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality by 2045, including 85% reduction in emissions. As part of California's continued climate leadership, the legislature enacted a landmark package of climate disclosure laws. As Senators Wiener and Stern have emphasized earlier, these laws are critical tools for advancing corporate transparency around greenhouse gas emissions, transparency that's essential for informed decision-making by investors and consumers. I will walk through the specifics regarding each bill in upcoming slides. Next slide. These new bills require companies to disclose information about their greenhouse gas emissions, their climate-related financial risks, and the steps they're taking to address those risks. Why does this matter? Because people want to make informed choices, whether it's where to invest their money or which companies they choose to support as consumers. While the laws don't force companies to reduce emissions, they will help daylight climate information. Next slide, please. Let's take a deeper dive into SB 253, California's Climate Data Disclosure Law. The bill applies to large public and private companies doing business in California with annual revenues over $1 billion. These are the entities that will be required to disclose their emissions across all three scopes. That means not just Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which cover direct emissions and purchased energy, but also Scope 3 emissions, which include all indirect emissions in a company's supply chain. Legislative requirements also outline timing requirements. The first reporting year for Scope 1 and 2 disclosures will be 2026 for 2025 emissions using best available methods. And Scope 3 reporting begins in 2027 for 2026 emissions. The law also includes third-party assurance requirements, beginning with limited assurance for Scope 1 and 2 emissions in 2026 and moving towards reasonable assurance in 2030. This phased-in approach gives companies time to improve data quality and produce data that is useful to consumers and investors. This law also allows for use of existing reporting standards such as the GHG protocol. Next slide, please. CARB released an enforcement notice in December of 2024 to inform companies as they prepare for SB 253 reporting. First, no penalties will be issued in 2026 for incomplete reports as long as the company can show a good faith effort to comply. This gives businesses time to get systems in place without fear of immediate fines. Second, companies can use existing data for their first reports. Start with what you have. The first report due in 2026 for 2025 data will focus only on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions using best available methods. Finally, CARB is encouraging companies to use this time to build strong reporting practices and prepare for full compliance down the road. Next slide, please. Now let's discuss SB 261, California's climate-related financial risk disclosure. This law applies to U.S. companies doing business in California with annual revenues over $500 million, and it introduces a biannual reporting requirement. Starting in 2026, these companies will be required to publicly disclose their climate-related financial risks, as well as the measures they're taking to reduce and adapt to those risks. This includes physical risks like wildfires and droughts, and transitional risks tied to policy shifts, market changes, and the move towards a low-carbon economy. These reports must be posted in a way that is accessible to the public. A key feature of SB 261 is its emphasis on leveraging existing voluntary reporting frameworks. Specifically, the law encourages reporting of climate-related financial risk disclosures using ISSB standards, which evolved from the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Risk Disclosures, or TCFD. This ensures that the disclosures are meaningful, structured, and comparable across industries. Another critical element is the requirement for CARB to contract with a nonprofit climate reporting organization. This partner helps ensure consistent methodology and guidance in compiling these disclosures. Next slide, please. Now let's examine SB 219, the companion bill that introduces key modifications to California's landmark climate disclosure laws, SB 253 and SB 261. These adjustments aim to provide companies with additional flexibility and clarity as they prepare to meet the state's ambitious environmental reporting requirements. For Scope 3 emissions, the bill recognizes the complexity of collecting data across supply chains and allows companies to phase in Scope 3 disclosures. The law also presents a parent-level consolidation option. This means that companies can report their emissions and climate-related financial risks at the parent company level, potentially simplifying the reporting process for subsidiaries and affiliates. Next slide, please. This slide gives a snapshot of how we're developing the climate disclosure program, both through informal engagement and the formal regulatory process. CARB is moving expeditiously to move ahead with the regulatory process. To support our work implementing these bills, CARB launched a public solicitation in late 2024, as Dr. Vergis mentioned earlier. That continued into early 2025. Right now, we're in what we call the informal pre-rulemaking phase. This is a time for listening and learning, engaging with stakeholders, spreading awareness about the program, and gathering input on how staff's proposal could be improved. Once we move into the formal rulemaking process on the right side, things follow the path required by California's Administrative Procedures Act, or APA. This path starts with a public notice that includes the proposed regulation text, CARB staff rationale, and supporting analyses. From the time that the notice goes out, we'll have 1 year to complete the final rulemaking record and submit it to the Office of Administrative Law for review under the APA. Public input is an important component of the APA process. The release of the public rulemaking notice starts a 45-day comment period, and CARB will provide written responses to comments received in what's called the Final Statement of Reasonings, or FSOR. Throughout the process, CARB will need to ensure that the regulation provides appropriate detail, clarity, and meets all APA requirements. We're committed to keeping everyone informed and involved as the process continues. Next, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Haynes Stevens to discuss how our efforts fits into the international context. Haynes.
Thanks, Johnny. Climate disclosure is an emerging global standard with dozens of jurisdictions around the world running, designing, or proposing their own disclosure programs. In recent history, these programs mainly base their requirements on the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, also known as TCFD. However, since the task force was disbanded in late 2023, many jurisdictions have begun to align their requirements with the standards of the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB. Current reports show that 30 jurisdictions are in the process of introducing ISSB standards into their program requirements. Altogether, these 30 jurisdictions account for over half of the global GDP and over half of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Some jurisdictions align their requirements almost exactly with the ISSB standards. Other jurisdictions take a building blocks approach where they start by selecting the appropriate portions of the ISSB standards and then modify or add to those initial building blocks as needed to meet their program's objectives. CARB is paying close attention to many of the disclosure programs in other jurisdictions, hoping to gain insight from their experiences. We hope to learn from programs with some reporting cycles under their belt, such as those in the United Kingdom and New Zealand, as well as observe programs that are similarly entering their initial stages, including those in Japan and Australia. We are also tuning in closely as the European Union crafts revisions to its reporting standards through its omnibus package. By studying the programs of other jurisdictions, CARB can gain insights to help us design reporting standards that will empower consumers and stakeholders without confusing or exhausting the reporting entities. Next slide, please. CARB posted a solicitation for public comment on these climate disclosure laws, which was open from December 2024 through March 2025. The solicitation sought input and suggestions on how to best implement the regulations. From the solicitation, we received 261 responses, virtually all of which were submitted as uploaded letters with multiple comments per letter. In this section, we will present initial staff concepts on the key topics identified during our review of public comment. Next slide, please. Oh, perfect. From the comments, staff identified two emerging themes regarding the development of the regulations. These two themes can be summarized as who will be covered and what will be required. Beginning with who will be covered, many commenters noted the statute's use of terms that require more precise definitions, most notably the terms doing business in California, revenue, and various corporate relationships such as parent and subsidiary. For the theme of what will be required, staff consistently read about the importance of streamlining our regulations to align with existing protocols and reporting requirements, as well as minimizing the cost of compliance. Staff are evaluating how to best incorporate these concerns while ensuring that the regulation has the level of clarity and specificity needed to be implemented effectively. SB 253 and SB 261 rely on the same terms to define who will be covered. Regarding this topic, commenters' main concerns were for the regulations to define doing business in California, define the term revenue, and define relationships between parent and subsidiary companies. The relevant text in the statutes is highlighted in the following slides for reference. This slide shows the SB 253 statute text with the subject text highlighted. And this slide shows the SB 261 statute text with the same key text highlighted. And as mentioned before, these slides will be available following this workshop. The initial question posed in our public solicitation was, should CARB adopt the interpretation of doing business in California found in the Revenue and Tax Code section 23101? The suggestion that CARB may use this tax code to define doing business in California generated a range of responses from commenters. Some commented that yes, the tax code is an appropriate definition and consistent with other state regulations. Some commented that no, the tax code should not be adopted because its definition is too broad and would include companies doing little business in California. Some commented that the tax code should be tailored to exclude businesses that have a tenuous connection to the state or greenhouse gas emissions within the state. And some commented that CARB should search for other existing definitions, such as that included in the California Consumer Privacy Act, and that any definition require a material nexus to California. The initial staff concept favors use of the California Revenue and Tax Code definition, specifically parts A and B, which we will show on a later slide, to determine if a company is doing business in California. This would support consistency between regulatory frameworks. However, recognizing that CARB and the California Franchise Tax Board have different mandates, CARB may need to modify its definition to accomplish the statute objectives. For example, the code could be revised to exclude businesses that have a presence in California but transact minimal revenues within the state. The initial staff concept is that the Revenue and Tax Code definition provided in section 23101 appears to be workable with some proposed modifications tailored to the objectives of the disclosure regulations. Reviewing the submitted concerns that this definition is too broad, we noted that the definition begins with section 23101 subsection A, which states that doing business means actively engaging in any transaction for the purpose of financial or pecuniary gain or profit. However, this section goes on to specify that doing business in California means that a business meets both the requirements of subsection A and B, which includes economic thresholds that help refine whether a business is considered to be doing business in California. Our goal here is to harmonize CARB's definition as much as possible with existing definitions in California code, while also taking stakeholder input into account to ensure that our definition is not overly broad. We are further proposing to incorporate existing code section 23101.5, which helps distinguish between companies with meaningful economic activity in the state versus those with only minor or exempt activities. This slide presents section 23101, subsections A and B, with modifications to reflect that for the purposes of SB 253, the conditions of both A and B would need to be met for a business to be defined as doing business in California. As mentioned earlier, the material presented today represents initial staff concepts. And as staff continue to work through these concepts, we welcome continued public feedback. Specifically, the questions on this slide aim to help us better understand whether the proposed definition for doing business in California would cast too large a net and whether additional modifications would be needed. Follow-up questions on this topic include, what specific resources exist to identify businesses based on this definition? Does this definition provide regulatory clarity for SB 253 implementation, or are further edits needed? Commenters have suggested exemptions for various business sectors. Based on statute, what would be the basis for such exemptions? And lastly, How should this definition be applied to the requirements of SB 261? Shifting to the topic of defining revenue, comments regarding the use of the term revenue included that revenue must be defined to accurately identify covered business entities. It is important to clarify how revenue is determined with regard to parent and subsidiary relationships. Revenues generated by the parent of a subsidiary business that is covered should not be included in the calculation of the subsidiary's gross revenues. And lastly, that income sources in the financial sector, such as interest, fees, dividends, and investment income, should not be considered revenue as they do not represent greenhouse gas emissions. For the purpose of determining whether an entity meets the annual revenue threshold in SB 253 and SB 261, our initial staff concept is that total annual revenues shall be determined based on California Revenue and Taxation Code, Section 25120, where total annual revenue means gross receipts as defined in Section 25120, subsection F, paragraph 2. CARB staff welcome further public feedback regarding our initial concept for revenue, and we offer the following questions. Is the initial staff concept for definition of revenue consistent with current business practices? Would the definition benefit from additional reference to the most recently audited financial statements? Should CARB define revenue based on the parent or the company, for example, a subsidiary clearly doing business in California and a subsidiary of an international corporation? Whether you're aware of existing definitions of revenue that CARB should consider is also a question that we offer. We received many comments reinforcing the importance of streamlining our regulation to be consistent with existing protocols and minimizing new requirements. We want to acknowledge that the final definition of revenue and the reporting structure could have important ramifications to our streamlining efforts. The solicitation responses with respect to corporate relationships included multiple comments on how to apply the regulations to parent and subsidiary businesses. Responses indicated that application to the parent business is unclear, including what is the definition of a parent and subsidiary? Is a definition of level of control needed? If a subsidiary company is doing business in California, do the requirements of these regulations extend to the parent company located outside of California? The initial staff concept on this topic suggests that there should be a defined operational control, such as, does a parent company exercise decision-making authority within the subsidiary? The California Cap and Trade program, or Cap and Trade regulation, provides precedent for this approach, using the level of decision-making authority to define a corporate association. Under the California Cap and Trade program, a corporate association exists when one entity has a degree of ownership or control over another entity. When this degree of ownership gives the first entity effective control over the second, the regulation considers the two entities to have a direct corporate association. Generally, a level of ownership or control of 50% or greater requires that a corporate association be recognized in the Cap and Trade program. We recognize that though this is the precedent process, some Cap and Trade participants have had difficulty preparing the amount of detailed documentation required by the program. The initial staff concept regarding corporate relationships generated the following questions. Should the Cap and Trade approach, defining a parent and subsidiary relationship, be established for these regulations? If using the Cap and Trade model, are there additional thresholds or considerations that CARB should consider when defining a parent and subsidiary relationship? If not using the Cap and Trade model, are there other suggestions to define parent and subsidiary relationships? In terms of what will be required by covered entities, most commenters supported corporate reporting and commented that our regulations should be consistent with existing programs to minimize duplicity and costs. Other commenters noted that many existing protocols are voluntary or do not present useful information. Responses to our solicitation indicate that many companies are already reporting greenhouse gas emissions and financial risk information in accordance with various existing protocols. However, most of these protocols use voluntary and sometimes equivocal standards. Based on our experience and understanding of California regulatory requirements, CARB may need to adopt more precise requirements than voluntary protocols offer, so we can meet the legal requirements for a regulation set forth in the Administrative Procedure Act, including the clarity standard for California's rulemaking regulations. Still, CARB staff support the goals of interoperability, reducing duplicity, and minimizing costs wherever possible. And the better we can understand the format and detail of climate-related information that companies are already disclosing, the better we will be able to streamline our regulatory requirements. This concludes our highlight of the foundational questions that we are researching based on the solicitation feedback. At this time, Johnny Raymond will present a few CARB questions seeking public guidance on some broader topics.
Thank you, Haynes. As we've begun shaping California's greenhouse gas reporting framework, we've received a wide range of feedback on what information should be required. To that end, staff are seeking additional input on a set of follow-up questions that reflect the major themes and concerns raised in recent stakeholder comments. Your responses to these questions will be critical in shaping us for developing the reporting program that is robust, practical, and aligned with California's climate goals. We are interested in a couple of key themes as presented on this slide. We recognize that the growing demand for actionable, comparable climate-related data and want to ensure that disclosures are truly serving their intended audiences and ensure that we are providing clarity where it is needed for companies that will be part of these climate disclosure programs. Next slide. As we move forward with implementation, we're focused on how to effectively design emission reporting requirements that reflect both the complexity and variability of different emission types. This slide highlights several key areas where we're seeking your feedback, specifically around Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Scope 1 and 2 emissions are generally understood, and Scope 3 emissions, which occur across a company's value chain, both upstream and downstream, are the least commonly and consistently reported. The questions shown here are intended to get at a couple of the themes, like how can we build a system that encourages both better data quality over time without overburdening reporting entities early on? The next one, are existing protocols sufficient to meet California's regulatory requirements? And how can we go about incorporating materiality thresholds into this work? In particular, we are hearing from commenters that materiality when it comes to Scope 3 emissions is critical. Next slide. Now we'd like to shift focus to SB 261 and explore some key questions related to its implementation. Should CARB implement the law through a formal regulatory process, or are there alternative pathways that would meet the bill's objectives? And if regulation is the right approach, how should we define its scope? What entities or disclosures should be included? And how do we ensure it's actionable? The EU has moved quickly on climate-related disclosures, particularly through the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. We're eager to hear from those of you familiar with that process. What is working, what challenges are emerging, and what lessons might California take from that experience? The final question is tied into how we write and enforce regulations. California has legal requirements, including AOL's clarity standard that govern how we structure rules. Next slide, please. Next, let's discuss next steps. We want to emphasize how important your continued engagement is as we move forward with implementing the 200s. First and foremost, we want your feedback. Your input helps shape this from the ground up. If you haven't already, we strongly encourage you to sign up to stay engaged. This will ensure you're notified about upcoming workshops, draft materials that are posted, and opportunities for formal comments. We'll continue to hold public engagement events throughout the rule development process. If you have questions, ideas, or follow-up comments, please reach out to us at the email listed on this slide. We monitor this inbox closely and want to keep lines of communication open with stakeholders. We'll be working to develop a regulation by the end of the year, so we will need your help as we continue in this process. Now we're going to pivot to introduce our first guest speaker from Montrose Environmental.
Hi,
After new
thanks.
Sorry. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you first, Mariah.
Perfect.
After new legislation was passed, there was a clear need to better understand that the many greenhouse gas reporting programs already in place, both regulatory and voluntary, to help with this. CARB contracted with Montrose Environmental Group to conduct a detailed study to learn about these programs. Montrose reviewed several major programs, including our very own California Mandatory Reporting Regulation, or MRR, the US EPA's program, Canada, and the UK, as well as other voluntary reporting systems. They focused on key questions. How does each program define and measure scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions? What sectors are covered? And how do the programs help ensure accuracy and reliability? The results of a comprehensive study showing where these programs align and where they differ. With that background in mind, I'd like to invite Montrose to take us through the findings of their study in more detail. I'm now going to turn over the presentation to Montrose. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Johnny. Sorry about that. So like Johnny said, we are doing an overview of selected GHG emissions reporting programs. So thanks for joining us. My name is Mariah Gailey, and I am with my colleague Alexa Ambrosio with Montrose Environmental, and we are going to discuss the project Montrose undertook alongside CARB to study GHG emission reporting programs. Next slide, please. All right, Montrose was contracted by CARB to prepare a comprehensive summary of how GHG accounting and reporting programs differ and or are aligned with the many state, federal, and voluntary methods that quantify greenhouse gases. CARB wanted to understand how and why reported emissions may differ across the programs. So the first task required Montrose to identify regulatory and non-regulatory programs to be studied in coordination with CARB. This review included the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program and CARB's regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gases. The first task included identifying the scopes and specific sectors covered by each GHG reporting program, and then ultimately explaining why the programs were chosen or not chosen for the final study. The final study clearly specifies any differences in sectors and scope boundaries, and we worked with CARB to develop comparison factors, which we will discuss later. The final deliverable will be a comprehensive, non-technical comparison document on how the programs compare or differ with each other. Next slide, please. All right, now we will examine the programs we initially considered and the reason for exclusion and the final list of programs. So as you can see on the screen, the green table lists the final programs included in the study, while the red table lists the programs that were ultimately excluded. And we'll kind of go through the reasons of exclusion. So the initial list of programs we considered included 4 regulatory programs and 7 non-regulatory programs. Our initial consideration included the regulatory program, European Union Emission Reporting, or Emission Monitoring and Reporting Regulation, which included Scope 1 and 2 guidance, as well as sector guidance for sectors such as energy and industrial processes. However, this was ultimately excluded because it's a guideline for member states to report whole country emissions and does not offer a scalable solution for corporations. We also, the initial list also included the 3 non-regulatory programs, which three non-regulatory programs were ultimately excluded, from which were the International Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories, because it only refers to indirect and direct emissions. It doesn't use the language scope 1 and scope 2. And following discussions with CARB and based on the lack of specific information, Montrose and CARB decided that the program was not needed in the final report. Second, the International Sustainability and Carbon Certification, or ISCC, EU greenhouse gas emissions only refers to indirect and direct emissions, much like IPCC, and does have sector guidance for biofuels and biomass, among others. Ultimately, ISCC was excluded because the program covers a limited number of sectors, some of which are covered by the CARB low carbon fuel standard. Finally, the last regulatory program which was ultimately excluded was the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO 14164, greenhouse gases. The program does have scope 1, 2, and 3 guidance, but does not have sector-specific guidance. Additionally, it requires robust internal controls and compliance exercises, and the document is not publicly available, which is the final reason why it was removed. The final list of programs that will be included in the full study, for regulatory, we have the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, which includes guidance on scope 1 and does have sector-specific guidance available, such as cement production and electricity generation. Additionally, the Environment and Climate Change Canada Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, which provides guidance on scope 1 and does have sector-specific guidance for cement production and ethanol production, among others. And the California Air Resources Board regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions, which provides guidance on scope 1 and does have sector-specific guidance for sectors such as cement production and iron and steel. Finally, onto the non-regulatory programs. The non-regulatory programs included the Greenhouse Gas Protocol for Corporate Accounting and Reporting Standard, which includes all 3 scopes and does have sector-specific guidance for sectors such as coal mining and oil and gas. Second, the Climate Registry's General Reporting Protocol, which includes scope 1, 2, and 3, and the guidance can be applied to any sector. Third, the US EPA Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions inventory guidance, which again covers all 3 sectors and can be applied to all 3 scopes and can be applied to any sector. And finally, we have the United Kingdom's environmental reporting guidelines, which include guidance on all 3 sectors and can be applied to, all 3 scopes and can be applied to any sector. And now I'll pass it over to my colleague, Alexa.
Thank you, Mariah. And if we can go to the next slide. All right. So in conjunction with selecting programs, we also collaborated with CARB to define program criteria. We landed on accuracy, including program emissions and emissions factor accuracy, activity data collection and management, data availability and transparency, transparency, flexibility of substitutes, and stringency and reliability. Next slide. We studied programs based on the following questions under each selected criteria. Before we could dive into the criteria, though, we did have to define the program scope. Primarily, which emission scopes were covered out of direct scope 1 and indirect scope 2 and 3 emissions, and whether the program covered any or all industry sectors. Emission scopes varied by program, and while all studied programs covered scope 1, the reporting threshold for regulatory programs differed. While the Environment and Climate Change Canada Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program and the CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions require companies emitting over 10,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year to report Scope 1 emissions, the US EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program requires companies operating in certain sectors or emitting over 25,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year to report Scope 1 emissions. The regulatory programs thus namely cover Scope 1, while the voluntary programs by nature have more flexibility and offer guidance covering both direct and indirect scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions. In terms of industry sector coverage, the regulatory programs generally provide more prescriptive guidance for more industries than voluntary programs. Moving on to program accuracy, we reviewed each program against the degree to which they require reporters to reflect the true value of their reported emissions, for example, through third-party verification requirements. The US EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program and the Environment and Climate Change Canada reporting programs provide quality assurance requirements within industries and subsectors. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol and EPA Scopes 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas guidance do not require verification as voluntary programs, and the CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions, on the other hand, requires third-party verification conducted by a CARB-accredited verifier for entities emitting over 25,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year at a reasonable level of assurance, meaning that the reporter must have a less than 5% degree of material misstatement. Interestingly, the Climate Registry requires its member companies to submit accredited third-party verification as outlined in the Climate Registry's General Verification Protocol. And though the UK Environmental Reporting Guidelines do not require third-party verification, it recommends assurance and verification to its reporters, recognizing standards such as the ISO 14001. Next, we reviewed the accuracy of emissions measurement and calculation methodologies, for example, whether the program calculation requirements are standardized, data collection requires direct measurement methodologies, or the measurement equipment requires calibration and accuracy testing. This comparison focused on data certainty and whether the program offered example or assumptions for reporters. The Environment and Climate Change Canada Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, the Climate Registry, and the CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions require reporters to obtain either reasonable or limited assurance for certain emissions data and offer methods to account for uncertainty in data collection. And though the Greenhouse Gas Protocol does not require reporters to account for uncertainty, the program provides a cross-sector tool to calculate statistical parameter uncertainties due to random errors related to the calculation of greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions measurement methodologies vary by program and sector, and while all programs studied offer calculation methodologies, the UK Environmental Reporting Guidelines and Greenhouse Gas Protocol additionally provide example calculations. The CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions allows for the use of alternate methodologies when the prescribed methods are not appropriate or practical, and the Climate Registry guidelines are mandatory for members, but optional for non-members. Emission factor accuracy refers to whether the program publishes emission factors and the frequency of emission factor updates. We reviewed emission factor selection, including scope, boundary, granularity, conversion factors, functional unit, methodological choices, assumptions, and global warming potential values. The majority of programs publish program-specific emission factors, while the remaining programs refer reporters to publicly available sources or compile emission factors from publicly available sources. Frequency of updates varies by program and does not follow a pattern according to regulatory or voluntary requirements. Finally, location-based emission factors are largely associated with Scope 2 emissions calculations. And though the US EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program and the Environment and Climate Change Canada Greenhouse Gas Reporting Programs do not require Scope 2 emissions calculations, both agencies publish location-based factors. All voluntary programs reviewed publish location-based factors for reporters to reference, though most direct reporters to outside sources. All right, and next slide. Activity data collection and management refers to the means and methodologies the program outlines for obtaining activity data, including the standardization or prescriptiveness of units of measurement. Data collection requirements vary per program, section, sector, methodology, or source. Similarly, record-keeping procedures vary by program. The US EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program requires reporters to retain all required records for at least 3 years from the date of submission. The Environment and Climate Change Canada Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program specifies record-keeping requirements for estimated data. The CARB regulation for mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions requires reporters in the cap and trade program to keep records for 10 years, while facilities not acting in the cap and trade program must keep records for 5 years. The UK environmental reporting guidelines do not require record-keeping procedures for activity data, though recommend reporters keep records of all assumptions, calculations, and methodologies. The GHG protocol and the EPA scopes 1, 2, 3, and 3 greenhouse gas guidance do not require record-keeping procedures. And finally, the climate registry outlines record-keeping procedures in alignment with procedures detailed in the iOS 14065. The actual and estimated data criteria is dependent on data availability and methodology, and the various types of activity data required, depending on the sector, source, and scope of the greenhouse gas emissions quantification methodology, can include, but are not limited to, real-time measurements from continuous emissions monitoring systems, energy consumption data, particularly electricity usage measured in kilowatt hours, and employee commuting and general commuting patterns or average distances based on surveys. Data availability and transparency refer to whether the program requires reporting agencies to submit emissions data. The US EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, the Environment and Climate Change Canada Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, and the CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions require reporters to submit their emissions data if they fulfill the qualifications detailed in the regulation. Voluntary programs typically do not require reporters to submit their emissions data, though the climate registry, publishes member-reported data. Regulatory programs requiring submissions also publish those submissions to web pages in summaries or reports. Data flexibility of substitutes refers to the various methodologies, estimates, or assumptions employed to address missing data or activity data in the context of emissions calculations methodologies. All programs provide alternatives and substitutes for certain quantification methodologies or data collection, and examples of substitute data vary by source and sector for all programs, though many programs call on similar substitute examples. Stringency and reliability refer to the strictness of the regulations governing reporting. The US EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, the Environment and Climate Change Canada Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, and the CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions are mandatory programs, while the UK Environmental Reporting Guidelines, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and the EPA Scopes 1, 2, and 3 Greenhouse Gas Guidance are voluntary. The Climate Registry is mandatory for members and voluntary for non-members. Likewise, the US EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, the Environment and Climate Change Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, and the CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions require reporters to use the prescribed guidelines, while the UK Environmental Reporting Guidelines, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and the EPA Scopes 1, 2, and 3 Greenhouse Gas Guidance do not. In cases where the required method is not appropriate or practical, the CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions allows reporters to use alternate methods of reporting. And the US EPA Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reporting Program, the Environment and Climate Change Canada Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, and the CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions deploy compliance enforcement mechanisms, while the UK Environmental Reporting Guidelines, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the Climate Registry, and the EPA Scopes 1, 2, and 3 Greenhouse Gas Guidance do not. Next slide, please. And here you may find a quick summary table of the programs for your reference. With that, I will hand it back to Mariah for some closing remarks.
Thanks so much, Alexa. I know that was a lot, so sorry. Can you go to the next slide? We'll briefly wrap up with some key comparisons and differences between the programs. So first, from the study, it can be concluded that the regulatory programs have more stringent calculation methodologies and strict verification and accuracy guidelines compared to the voluntary programs that were studied. In addition, regulatory programs also cover more industry sectors than the voluntary framework, such as guidance for ferroalloy production, glass production, and geologic carbon dioxide sequestration. However, the third-party verification requirements do not follow the regulatory voluntary trend. The CARB regulation for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions requires third-party verification, and as does the climate registry, but only for member companies. And while voluntary programs may publish emission factors or allow reporters to choose and justify their emission factors, regulatory programs reference program developed and sector specific emission factors. The UK Environmental Reporting Guidelines and the GHG Protocol also publish emission factors for their reporters. The UK Environmental Reporting Guideline refer to UK published emission factors and have comprehensive methodologies for Scope 3 emission factors. On the other hand, the Climate Registry and the EPA Scope 1, 2, and 3 guidance publish default emission factors, which are publicly available. Finally, the greenhouse gas protocol publishes emission factors for select sectors in their emission factor cross-sector tool and additional sector-specific white papers. The GHG protocol still holds the most used and referenced Scope 2 and 3 emissions definitions, categorizations, and methodologies compared to other study programs. And while voluntary programs frequently reference the GHG protocol or provide additional sources for Scope 2 and 3 emission factors, regulatory frameworks tend to only cover Scope 1 emissions and do not provide guidance or methodologies for Scope 2 and 3 emissions. Next slide. Thank you so much, and we will now pass it back to CARB. Thanks, Johnny.
Hey, thank you to the Montrose team for this great work you did. I'm going to now turn the presentation back over to Haynes, who will introduce UCLA. Haynes.
Thanks, Johnny. Yes, so as Johnny mentioned, we also have the good fortune of being joined today by researchers and staff from the Center for Impact at the University of California, Los Angeles Anderson School of Management. Through the Center's Open for Good initiative, they have analyzed publicly disclosed information from the S&P 500 to collect sustainability data from the largest firms in the United States. Today, they will deliver a presentation following the release of their 2025 State of Corporate Sustainability Disclosure Report. The report includes an assessment of climate disclosure reporting, current data gaps, and improvement opportunities for this rulemaking process to consider. We would like to welcome the folks from the Open for Good initiative into our workshop and invite them to take us through their important findings and corresponding recommendations.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to share the highlights from our brand new State of Corporate Sustainability Disclosure Reports. Next slides, please. So why the Open for Good initiative at UCLA? We started this initiative because we believe that sustainability metrics matter, and the idea is very simple. What gets gets managed. If companies do not measure their impact, they cannot manage it effectively. But it's not just about companies. This kind of information is also critical for stakeholders, employees, investors, and consumers who want to understand and support companies that take sustainability seriously. So at UCLA, we focus on S&P 500 companies. Why? Because they are the largest firms, and they have a significant environmental footprint, and they also have the capacity to lead both innovation and setting best practices. So what do? We collect data already publicly available, like sustainability reports and regulatory filings, and we analyze it to see what companies are actually disclosing. And our goal is to map the current state of sustainability reporting, identify the gaps, and support greater transparency and accountability, ideally in ways that are useful to regulators like the California Air Resources Board. Next slide. I just want to take a moment to thank the amazing team that makes this work possible. It's actually a lot of work. Next slide. So we just released the 2025 State of Corporate Sustainability Disclosure, our third annual report. And this year we zoomed in on 4 core areas: greenhouse gas emissions, climate risk assessment, climate strategy, and climate governance. Each offers a lens into where companies are making real progress and where gaps remain. And so we'll give the highlights today, but the data is online for a deeper dive. Next slide. So we evaluated 15 in the report, 15 sustainability metrics across all S&P 500 companies. And these include both quantitative measures like disclosure of greenhouse gas emission and the actual emissions, and qualitative elements such as the description of strategy. So the bold ones are the one we're going to focus on today. Next slide. And as I mentioned earlier, most of the data we analyze comes directly from companies' sustainability reports, also from transition plans and proxy statements. So until now, this has been a very hands-on process. Basically, we have a team of students who manually collect and review the data line by line. That said, we're starting to integrate some AI tools in our workflow. This year, for the first time, we used AI to help collect information on board-level climate competencies. So we have a scoring system, and it's very simple. If a company fully discloses the relevant information, they get a 1. If they do not disclose it, it's a 0. And if they provide only partial information, we give it 0.5. And all the data we are presenting today is based on the most recent reports available, which were published in 2023. Next slide. So first, let's talk about the disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions. As you probably all know here, Scope 1 greenhouse gas emission are the direct emission of the company, Scope 2 the emission from electricity generation, and Scope 3 is everything else, emission from both suppliers and consumers. In many cases, Scope 3 accounts for 70% or more of a company's total carbon footprint, especially for companies in sectors like retail, consumer goods, technology, and financial services. Next slide. So we have good news. We find that most companies in the S&P 500 disclose Scope 1 direct emission. We are at 90%, and about the same for Scope 2 at 89%. We also see a great increase from last year for Scope 3 emissions, which are now disclosed by 70% of companies. So this is good preparation for SB 253. However, more disclosure doesn't always mean better data, and methodologies and detail still vary widely. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Scope 3 emissions can represent over 70% of a company's total carbon footprint, but reporting is still inconsistent by sectors. Some sectors, like, as you can see here in the presentation on the slide, healthcare demonstrate this gap clearly. That's on the right. On the left, sorry, on the right, the utilities and materials sectors are more than 80%. So there are some, kind of differences, and we see that also the importance of Scope 3 in terms of our greenhouse gas emission vary by sector. Next slide. Scope 3 is complicated. There are 15 different categories that are listed here on this figure, and only half of the companies report a category level breakdown of Scope 3, which means that we don't really know where the emissions are when they disclose their Scope 3 emission, where they come from. We see the most reported categories on top of this chart, especially business travel, which is relatively easy to calculate. However, there are other categories that might be more important in terms of carbon footprint that are not reported. End of life treatment or transportation, for example. And these numbers here are overall, but we know they also vary greatly by sector. Next slide. So here's a great example from Comcast Corporate. This company actually discloses its Scope 3 emissions from all 15 categories, which few companies do. And what really stands out here is that downstream leased assets account for the biggest chunk, 39% of their Scope 3 emissions. And that kind of insight is incredibly valuable. It helps companies identify where their biggest impact lies, what we call emissions hotspots, and figure out where to dig deeper or take action. So now, I mean, Comcast is an outlier in this respect. On average, only about 12% of companies disclose this level of detail. So while it's great to see that it's possible, it also highlights how far most companies still have to go. Next slide. So we also see a good number of companies establishing net zero targets. A net zero target is a commitment to reduce and offset greenhouse gas emissions so that overall emissions balance out to zero by a specific date. 57% of companies have at least one net zero goal. And most of these targets are for Scope 1 and Scope 2, much fewer are targeted for Scope 3. Most of these targets are long-term, 2045 being the year for which this target will be achieved on average. And only 44% disclose interim targets. And without this interim target, it's hard to see. Without these milestones, it's difficult to know if this long-term target will be realized. So these milestones are, in fact, critical for ensuring companies stay on track and can be held accountable along the way. So that's still missing. Next slide. So overall, we're seeing more data, but uneven quality. Disclosing target is a start, but without execution and transparency on progress, those targets risk becoming more PR tools. Moving to the risk analysis. Next slide. And next slide. So there are two different types of climate risk, as you all probably know also. The physical risks, such as flood, droughts, wildfires, and this can be acute or chronic, and the transition risk, which are the policy, technology, market changes associated with the shift to a low carbon economy. So now that we've defined this climate risk, let's move to what we observe. Next slide. So we see about 70% of companies report in line with TCFD, which is a good start. So TCFD, as was described before, and now kind of taking over by ISSB, was established to develop recommendations for more effective climate-related disclosures to help investors, lenders, other stakeholders understand a company climate-related risks and opportunities. So the fact that 70% of companies are disclosing along the lines of TCFD is a good sign. Interestingly, on this figure, you see that there is more reporting of policy and legal risks. So this is good basis for SB 261, which will mandate reporting on risk exposure and mitigation strategy. It will allow also for a better understanding of specific physical risks. However, next slide. We observe a relative low disclosure of specific physical risks. Flood, extreme heat, wildfire are at the top here, on the top, with 22 to 31%. And so, the fact that we have a relatively low disclosure of specific risk can be concerning as more companies are exposed to chronic and acute impacts of climate change. Stakeholders, would need more detailed information to assess preparedness and resilience. Next slide. So now that we've looked at emissions and risk disclosure, let's turn to what companies are actually doing in response. We're moving into climate strategy. We'll talk also about transition planning. And climate strategy typically includes two main components: mitigation, aimed at reducing emissions, and adaptation, focused on preparing for the physical impact of climate change. Next slide. So we are seeing more, I'll show you some numbers, more climate transition plans. So what are climate transition plans? They are plans that connect goal with action. So this slide shows the 4 key elements of a transition plan: implementation strategy, metric and targets, engagement with stakeholders, and governance. So these pieces reveal whether companies have a real roadmap or just an ambition. Next slide. So we see 24% of S&P 500 who are starting to disclose this climate transition plan with all these different elements. So that's the good news. We're starting to see this real momentum. And these plans are a promising sign that companies are taking steps to cut emission, building long-term resilience. Next slide. In terms of climate strategy, we're seeing a lot more focus on mitigation than adaptation. So reading this climate plan, we see that most companies talk about switching to renewables or cutting emission, but far fewer are planning for the impact that are already here, like flooding, extreme heat, or stress or on infrastructure. But of course, a strong climate strategy will need both. And so, as you can see here in red, we have the strategies that are the one that most companies are disclosing. But what is interesting is the kind of difference between mitigation and adaptation. And I'm kind of assuming that this will also kind of evolve in the next few years. Moving to climate governance, next slide. And next slide. Climate governance. So nearly all firms, when we're asking, about, kind of who is, kind of taking charge or about climate strategy, nearly all firms report some level of board oversight of climate strategy, and that's encouraging. But we still need to ask, do these board members have the expertise to ask the tough questions, approve budgets, or hold leaders accountable? Next slide. And here we see not as much. We have over 4,600 board members that we have, kind of identified on the board of S&P 500. Only 7% had identifiable environmental experience. So for companies navigating climate disclosure and strategies, this lack of expertise is a major blind spot. And so you can see also differences here, and that's the case in every kind of data point that we find. There are really strong differences between sectors. There are sectors on the left who have much more expertise in the environment sector on the right, where almost no board member has kind of expertise in this list of kind of expertise that we've listed on the right, such as sustainability or environmental sustainability. Very, very few of these board members are listing this as something that they have expertise on. So board members play a critical role by ensuring that sustainability is integrated into long-term business strategy. And so without this expertise, it's going to be really harder for them to play that role. Moving to the conclusion, the key takeaway. So what are the big takeaways here? So first, the good news. Disclosure of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions continues to improve, which is especially timely as California SB 253 comes into effect. We also see that most firms are aligning with the TCFD framework, and that's an important step forward. But here the catch, companies tend to report more on policy-related risks than on physical climate risk, which are just as critical, especially for SB 261. On governance, climate is increasingly making its way into board-level discussions, but there's still a significant gap in environmental expertise on those boards, which limits effective oversight. We are also beginning to see early signs of climate transition planning, and that's encouraging. Still, many companies lack cohesive long-term strategy to actually meet their own climate goals. And finally, a persistent challenge is that this climate disclosure remain quite opaque. So right now we see inconsistent methodologies, incomplete reporting that make it hard to assess how much progress companies are truly making, or make it difficult to compare performance across sectors. And so without better data, investors and the public lack the tools to evaluate which companies are genuinely on track to meet their climate goals and which are falling short. So we believe that high quality climate disclosure data is critical for effective mitigation because it helps companies pinpoint their largest emission sources, set meaningful reduction pathways, and track progress over time. So that's, of course, coming from academia, it's important, we kind of put this emphasis on the quality of the data that is still missing. So thank you very much for listening. And if you want to see more of the data, and the report is online on our website. And thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss it.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for your great presentation and you and your team's work through the Open for Good initiative. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So now we're going to open this up for public comments. And so I have this slide here to kind of show folks the instructions as we move into the next phase of the workshop. And so just a reminder to folks that we will be adhering to a 2-minute comment limit, as mentioned earlier. We ask that you use the raise your hand feature within Zoom to get into the queue to speak. And I see folks have already used that type of procedure. So thanks to those early actors getting in line for public speaking. Put your comments in. When it's your turn, CARB staff will ask you to unmute. And after you push the unmute button, you may begin to speak. So for individuals joining by phone, if *6 does not work to unmute yourself, CARB staff can unmute you. And so we appreciate you staying on mute until it's your turn to speak, to be respectful to everyone's turn and to everyone getting in line to speak. Please state your name and affiliation, if applicable, so that everyone knows who is speaking. And if we move to the next slide. And I just wanted to mention, we want your feedback. It's very critical on the ideas we've shared with you all today. What makes sense, what's missing, and what could be done better. We're also open to new suggestions for rules as we're approaching those timelines as we walked through earlier. And we'd love to hear what matters most to you all. Lastly, it's important that we understand all stakeholders' input as we develop this very important program. So at this point, I will hand it off to my colleagues at CARB to begin the public comment period. Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good. Thank you, Johnny. And I will start the list of our public comments in order of the raised hands. Apologies in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. On deck, we have Priscilla Quiroz, but right now we have Kristen Vandenberg. Kristen, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Yes, thank you. My name is Kristen Vandenberg. I am a resident of California. Excuse me. I'm requesting that CARB not adopt interpretation of doing business in California found in the Revenue and Tax Code section 23101 because it is too broad, especially with respect to 23101B subsection 4. Companies who do not have a physical presence or emissions in California, but who do employ California residents as remote workers should be exempt from these regulations and reporting requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Kristen. On deck, we have Verity Shagar, but right now we have Priscilla Quiroz. Priscilla, please feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you. Priscilla Quiroz with the California Municipal Utilities Association. I have two brief comments. First, on the relevance of SB 253 and SB 261 to public entities. As clearly stated in the statutes, the reporting requirements of SB 253 and SB 261 only apply to partnerships, corporations, LLCs, or other business entities. As CMUA described in its previous comments, public entities do not fit within this definition and therefore not directly subject to these new reporting requirements. The traditional and commonly understood definition of these terms does not include public entities. Consistent with the approach described in the staff presentation of looking at the Revenue and Tax Code of Guidance, CMUA recommends that CARB look to section 18.6 21.10 lowercase b2 that defines a business entity as a corporation, including an S corporation, an organization exempt from tax pursuant to Chapter 4, commencing with Section 23701 of Part 11, a partnership or a limited liability company. NUA requests that ARB expressly clarify that public entities are not subject to these reporting requirements. Second, on leveraging existing reporting to verification. While SB 256 and SB 261 do not directly apply to POUs, the private entities that are subject to these requirements will need GHG emission data associated with their electrical consumption in order to meet the scope 2 of reporting requirements. Electrical utilities already comply with extensive GHG emission tracking and reporting obligations under existing regulations from CARB and CEC. So to the extent that reporting and covered entities will need GHG emission data associated with the electricity they consume, CARB should utilize existing reports to submit those data needs and avoid imposing any new reporting burdens on electric utilities. Thank you, and we look forward to continue to work with staff on these issues.
Thanks, Priscilla. Appreciate you coming today.
Thank you very much. On deck, we have Andrew Geisman, but up now we have Verity Chagar. Feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, my name is Verity Chagar, and I am one of the 14 members of the ISSB, which issues the ISSB standards expressly permitted to meet the requirements of SB 261. I am based in our San Francisco, California office and have lived and worked in California for 25 years. Congratulations to all of you at CARB and the staff and board for reaching this important milestone and to kick off this important work. ISSB standards, including S1 and S2, our climate standard, are built for capital markets. They provide a common language for companies in all markets to provide comparable, reliable, material information to investors. ISSB standards are designed, however, to fit a building blocks approach, where ISSB standards form the global baseline of consistent disclosures, and jurisdictions add on any additional requirements that are unique or specific to the jurisdiction's policy or other objectives. Having the same words, same measurement method, and same requirements in the global baseline of disclosures is what reduces cost and effort for companies. ISSB standards are now adopted, approved, or under consideration for use in more than 35 jurisdictions around the world, including the EU, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Mexico, Japan, China, and many others. S2 requires the use of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, requires disclosure of Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 disclosures. However, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol was not originally built for capital markets, so S2 also provides more detailed guidance to support high-quality disclosures. For example, we have a Scope 3 measurement framework that is required for use. This framework guides companies in choosing high-quality inputs for the estimations that Scope 3 measurement requires. I will try to call back and mention additional comments related to EU developments. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate the great background and your leadership on this.
Thank you very much. On deck, we have Stephanie Talavera, but up now we have Andrew Geisman. Andrew, please feel free to unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and deliver your comment.
Good afternoon. Andrew Geisman with Remington Seeds. Our question is more on a clarification as far as revenue. As a company that does most of our business outside of the state of California, we're wondering if the revenue totals are specific to California business or a business as a whole, just because of the discrepancy in size of revenue from outside of California versus inside. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. We're looking to gather information just like that. The proposed definition that we put forward, we're trying to get our hands around, what would the ramifications be in the kinds of situations that you're exactly describing. So if you or your company have ideas on how this may or may not capture your company, that would be helpful to learn more about.
Thank you. On deck, we have Nick Romo, but up now we have Stephanie Talavera. Stephanie, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Talavera. I'm here with Rutan Tucker, but I'm appearing just as an interested member of the public and not necessarily in a representative capacity. My concern with these types of supply chain emissions and the various protocols that they exist have been made more confusing by the tariff uncertainty. And I was wondering what sort of response CARB anticipates in that regard.
Would you mind unpacking that a little bit more for me? I'm not exactly sure I'm tracking.
While the supply chains are moving around to totally different countries of origin, and scope 3 emission criteria are in development, is tariff something that CARB is considering in crafting its regulations or rulemaking?
I see. Thank you for that. Yeah, I appreciate it. So we are looking at developing a regulation by the end of the year. I will say for scope 1 and 2, those timelines hit a little bit faster. Yes, for scope 3, those emissions will be captured for 2027 for the year 2026. So working through these kinds of questions and uncertainty is definitely something we'll want to do as part of developing that rulemaking. And I appreciate you flagging it. Hopefully we can continue the conversation in a little bit greater depth, maybe offline. We'd love to follow up with you.
Great, thank you so much. And I appreciate this was a great presentation today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. On deck, we have Amy Holmes, but up now we have Nick Romo. Nick, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you, Haynes. Nick Romo on behalf of the Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities, AICCU, which represents 80 plus nonprofit colleges and universities in the state. We are seeking explicit clarification in the implementing regs that the disclosure laws do not apply to California's independent nonprofit colleges and universities. We believe this request is consistent with the state and federal tax exempt statuses of our institutions and the legislative intent to apply the new disclosure laws to larger corporations rather than profit from the sale of goods. Furthermore, we believe this exemption request is consistent with the statutory treatment of the University of California. Specifically, AICC requested the CARB use the interpretation of doing business in California consistent with the tax exempt status of nonprofit educational institutions under our 501c3 status. And furthermore, the CARB wishes to further define the conditions in which a nonprofit institution of higher education is doing business in California. It should only subject unrelated business income related to the thresholds in both SB 253 and 261. So we look forward to working with CARB staff to further discuss the reporting that our universities do today and further explore the exemptions and refinements to the revenue definitions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nick. So your proposal would be use the tax exempt basis as foundation for why the exemption should be allowed.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, I moved Nick
No,
after his comment.
We can follow up later. Thank you, Nick.
Yes, please. Thank you, Nick. On deck, we have Kim Stone, but up now we have Nathan Warren. Nathan, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, thanks for having me. Nathan Warren, ESG Manager, California Water Service Group. So just a quick statement, we would encourage CARB to just use the GHG protocol. I'm a little unclear after this presentation if you plan to develop any specific programs or reporting frameworks, but just encourage you to stick with what is already out there and a well-accepted standard. Second of all, could you clarify the timeline for guidance? Because as we understood it, July 1st was the guidance for SB 253 and SB 261, but it sounds like based on this presentation, it's end of year. So if you could clarify that timeline, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Okay, let's maybe we'll take I'll take kind of the two parts of your question one at a time. So the first was, I think, your statement, certainly echoing a lot of what we heard, which is to use the GHG protocol as a foundation, or adopting it wholesale as part of our work that we're doing here. One of the things that we were also trying to convey as part of the presentation today, and maybe why it was confusing, is that we're trying to convey our general interest in trying to make this as streamlined and straightforward as possible in meeting the needs of investors, consumers, but also the businesses that will be complying with these laws when adopted. One of the things we're trying to convey today also is that because SB 253 directs CARB to write a recommendation, to write a regulation, that we need to meet the legal requirements of what exactly a regulation is. And that includes things like a clarity standard where we are subject to various requirements as part of a regulatory rulemaking, that we are very, very specific in our requirements. And so really where we're looking for feedback is, how do we take these kind of voluntary standards, but also make them fit into the specificity that we'll need to develop as part of a regulation. And that's really looking for input, as there isn't a lot of room or any room to be unclear or non-specific when we write a regulation. So how to take GHG protocol, which folks are familiar with, or others, and fit them into a regulatory context is kind of the crux of the challenge that we'll need help with as we move forward. I hope that's helpful. The second part of your question, I think, was to clarify the timeline for guidance for 253 and 261. Yes, we did mention in the presentation, we're trying to be, pretty forthright about this, which is that we're looking to develop a regulation by the end of the year. And so I would expect more process like this one to be continuing in the coming months. I hope that's helpful, Nathan, but happy to follow up with you separately if you want to unpack any of this to a deeper level of specificity. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I accidentally skipped over Amy Holm. So on deck will be Amy Holm, but up now we have Kim Stone. Kim, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you so much. Kim Stone of Stone Advocacy on behalf of Persephone. Thanking the senators, CARB leadership, and CARB staff for moving forward expeditiously with the 26 and 27 deadlines. Reporting entities absolutely need certainty and predictability that you all are providing. And we are, know that you are aware that many companies are already doing voluntary reporting and are just eagerly awaiting next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. On deck, we have Rob Larkin, but up now we have Amy Holm. Amy, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you, Haynes, and thank you to Dr. Burgess and CARB staff. My name is Amy Holm with the Climate Registry, which is a nonprofit organization based in Los Angeles that has been at the forefront of climate reporting and emissions data management for nearly 2 decades. Established in 2007, the Climate Registry has played a critical role in supporting organizations across North America in measuring, reporting, and verifying their greenhouse gas emissions with transparency and integrity. As a nonprofit entity, the Climate Registry is mission-driven, committed to advancing credible and consistent climate data practices that support carbon mitigation. Its services, including an online reporting platform, help organizations set and track emissions goals, prepare for regulatory compliance, and communicate progress with stakeholders. Over the past decade, a wide range of organizations, including corporations, government agencies, utilities, academic institutions, and other nonprofits, have been reporting to the Climate Registry. These organizations, some which have been reporting to the Climate Registry for over 17 years now, trust the Climate Registry's rigorous and standardized protocols, which are aligned with international best practices. This long-standing record reflects the Climate Registry's credibility and robustness in the climate reporting space. The Climate Registry has also partnered with many subnational and national jurisdictions, including Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, U.S. Department of Energy, and the country of Thailand to implement climate disclosure frameworks specific to the needs of those jurisdictions. So the Climate Registry looks forward to contributing its experience and technical expertise as to the specific needs of CARB's climate disclosure program as it evolves. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, Amy. Nice to see you.
Thank you. On deck, we have Anna Farrow, but up now we have Rob Larkin. Rob, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
I'm Rob Larkin. I'm a sustainability consultant and greenhouse gas mitigation lead at AECOM. So yeah, first of all, thank you so much for putting on this workshop. Really informative and useful. Thank you. Following up on a question that someone else had asked about timing, I was wondering the same thing because, I'm hearing a few things that seem to possibly be conflicting. So I just want to understand, great that you're holding firm to the timeline of reporting greenhouse gas emissions starting in 2026. And that seems like that would go with the, SB 219 timeline of having a regulation in July. But it sounds like, there was something, I noticed that something about an initial proposed regulation. And then from there, it'd be a year, to fully develop the regulation, incorporate all feedback. I just wanted to see if you had a little more clarity on the timeline of when you think there will be an initial proposed regulatory text and then when it'll be finalized. And I think I heard by the end of the year. But the reason I'm wanting to clarify is because, obviously if companies are starting to wonder what, the reporting deadline will be to know how to, compile the right information in order to meet that deadline.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to clarify, Rob. I appreciate it. So I think Senator Wiener set it up very nicely, which is, from the company perspective, his take-home message, I think that we all heard was, for scope 1 and 2, holding firm to those reporting deadlines of 2026 for 2025 emissions, scope 3 by 2027 for 2026 emissions. All the while, CARB working with you all to ramp up to develop a regulation by the end of the year. So if what you're transmitting to me is, hey, companies are ramping up and getting ready for, this to go into place and starting to think about their 2025 emissions now, that's great, as long as we're all ramping up in parallel. We did put out, an enforcement notice recently that that hopefully provides, kind of a glide path and reassurance to companies, that as we're all doing our best to ramp up initially, that's really the goal here. So I think a lot of folks here are probably new to the CARB process, so we're trying to lay it out as straightforward as possible. But really for us, an important part of developing that regulation and that certainty is in fact, this engagement process that we have with folks. So expect more of that in the months to come.
Thank you. On deck, we have Nick Lapis, but up now we have Anna Farrow. Anna, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you. My name is Anna Farrow from the law firm of Davis Wright Tremaine, and we represent a number of clients seeking clarity on the applicability of reporting requirements. One of our clients is a financial services company that does business with certain entities in California, but while they do not have an office in California, they do currently have around 30 remote employees working from home within the state. And so they're seeking some clarity on whether under the initial staff concept, the presence of those work from home employees brings this financial services company under the definition of doing business within California.
I think there's probably two parts of that, Anna, that we're trying to work through, in partnership with you all. One is the revenue threshold, the 500 million or 1 billion a year. So I think threshold question number one is, does this company fall into either of those revenue thresholds as proposed to be defined by staff? And then the secondary question is, okay, well, are they doing business in California? And does the staff concept for how to do business in California, help provide needed clarification there? And if neither of those two provide, needed clarification for, businesses like this one to understand whether or not they would be regulated by us, getting some feedback as to how we might be able to clarify those definitions will be a very important part of this process. So really interested in exploring that further with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. On deck, we have Michelle Savage, but up now we have Nick Lapis. Nick, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, good morning. Nick Lapis with Californians Against Waste. I'm actually wondering if it would be possible for you all to schedule a workshop or a meeting specifically focused on the waste reduction elements or I guess the waste accounting elements of Scope 3. The Scope 3 emissions are probably most readily impacted by the waste sector. And there are a lot of open questions about how you count different things, and every methodology seems to have a different approach. Whether you look downstream in terms of what one does with their materials, and you start looking at landfill gas, fugitive emissions, carbon sequestration in landfills, et cetera. If you look at incineration, what emissions you're assuming there, accounting for biogenic emissions is handled very differently in different protocols. For material that's diverted, or like organic waste that's diverted to composting, there's a lot of conversation, including by CARB, about how you account for emission reductions from compost application on natural and working lands. For food that's donated to food banks, there's questions about accounting the benefits there as well. And then on the upstream side, the use of recycled content in material that's being manufactured, and the use of procurement decisions and what you're purchasing and the recycled content and other factors in the material you're purchasing. Similarly for fossil fuel versus non-fossil fuel derived feedstocks for manufacturing and for purchasing. There's just a lot of issues here that are very complicated that CARB has previously spent months and months discussing, and I think it warrants one set of workshops. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you participating today. Good to see you as always. Yeah, as we mentioned today, we're looking to try to incorporate, existing protocols as they exist and are known by businesses currently, and trying to incorporate the best we can into the regulatory framework, and of course would expect further refinements to happen over time.
Thank you. On deck, we have Muriel Strand, but up now we have Michelle Savage. Michelle, please feel free to unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and deliver your comment.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, the workshops that you're conducting, and the way that you're gathering feedback. That's absolutely critical for a regulation like this. I'm Michelle Savage. I am with a nonprofit data standards organization called XBRL US. And I just wanted to talk about how data standards could be used to make disclosures more useful. So, my comments relate to the fact that CARB can make disclosures more useful by requiring businesses to report data in exactly the way that they report the data to other regulators. Lots of companies that are going to have to report to CARB will also be reporting the same information to an IFRS regulator, as Verity Chegar was talking about, or to the European Union through the CSRD. Those programs require data to be prepared in digital XBRL format. And when data is prepared in XBRL, it means that it's more interoperable, it's automated, it's machine readable, and that means that it's cheaper and faster to process. It will also be more consistent and comparable with other businesses reporting the same information worldwide, which will make it easier for companies that are already reporting to one of these non-US regulators. And for smaller entities that may not have the resources of larger companies and likely don't have to report to non-US regulators, my organization, XBRL US, is developing a free Excel-based tool that could be used by CARB to allow them to comply with the regulation, for basically for limited cost or no cost. This tool will be available and posted on our site by the end of next week, rather. So just, in sum, by adopting XBRL and by providing a free preparation tool for small organizations, CARB can, reduce reporting burden on both small and large companies, and just as importantly, generate data that is going to be much more actionable and useful for the purpose of meeting the goals of these two bills. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On deck, we have Jonathan Kendrick, but up now we have Muriel Strand. Muriel, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you. My name is Muriel Strand. I'm a citizen of California, an activist, and a retired air resources engineer. And so this is all great information. I see that staff are living up to the standards that I got used to when I was on staff. You've given me an awful lot to digest, and I look forward to reviewing a lot of this. Can you talk about the timeline for useful comments going forward? And you mentioned possibly giving more workshops. Can you just talk a little about what we can expect for the near term?
Thanks, Muriel. Always nice to see an alumni in the mix. Yeah, so I would expect more, as I mentioned, we're looking to develop a regulation, by the end of the year. So as you know, you can expect to see more from us in the coming months. I'll use this as an opportunity and jumping off point as provided to you from Muriel. Thank you so much. To note that if you all are not on our listserv to get notices for our workshop, please sign up. There's links in the slide that are posted to our public webpage. Also, folks can feel free to email us at climatedisclosure@arb.ca.gov. So lots more opportunities to come, Muriel. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Muriel. On deck, we have Stephanie Marlin. Up now, we have Jonathan Kendrick. Jonathan, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you very much. John Kendrick from the California Chamber of Commerce. At the outset, I'll note that we continue to object to SB 253 and 261 on legal grounds. We're plaintiffs in Chamber of Commerce versus Randolph, which challenges these laws as unconstitutional compelled speech that impermissibly burdens interstate commerce and exceeds California's authority. So nothing I'm saying today should be read as a waiver of those objections. If CARB does move forward, the scope should be kept narrow. The revenue and tax code section that you're looking at using is a minimal nexus test, which sweeps in firms with only de minimis activity here in California compared to their global revenues. If CARB moves forward, there needs to be a meaningful in-state threshold so that reporting entities have a genuine California footprint, not companies whose compliance costs dwarf their California sales. When it comes to the structure of this going forward, we should be honoring the statute's direction to minimize duplication of efforts, allowing companies to file the same reports that they prepare for other jurisdictions. If a California specific data point's missing, just let them have a short supplement rather than start from scratch. Assurance should be phased in realistically. The market for GHG disclosure assurance is embryonic. Moving too quickly there before the profession can provide it at scale will drive costs sky high and leave companies non-compliant through no fault of their own. We'd also like to see protection. The state should not require, the state should require reporting directly to CARB through either self-reporting or direct reporting to CARB. The introduction of a third-party emissions or climate organization raises significant concerns around data security, trade secrets, and for entities supporting national security missions, such as aerospace or other defense entities, national security concerns. So we'd like to see practical timelines, preserve flexibility. I recognize that I'm at my 2 minutes, so I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, John. On deck, we have Daniel Larson. Up now, we have Stephanie Marlin. Stephanie, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Marlin from AREIT UDR Inc. Thank you for the informative presentation and all the information presented here. My question or statement was basically there appears to be a large focus on companies continuing current reporting initiatives. So it would be helpful to consider when it comes to third-party verification, verifiers that are already used for emissions verification and clarify what qualifies as a CARB accredited verifier. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. I'll just say, use this as an opportunity, if you don't mind. Say, I know that there's, a lot of folks here, who may be new to CARB. So just wanted, to promote this opening to say, on specific issues like Stephanie, the ones that you're raising, we really want to hear about those, but also get your, feedback. And maybe not today, but as time goes on and we start working together more, on how to navigate these kinds of issues that you're raising. I definitely appreciate you raising the flag on them today. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. On deck, we have Stephanie Jones, but up now we have Daniel Larson. Daniel, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hello, I'm Dan Larson with Primordial Service Corporation. I'm the HSE director. I have a couple questions. One, will the submittal fee be tiered based on the GHG emissions submitted by the company? Two, we're a construction company. I'm wondering if there's some double counting going on GHG emissions. For instance, if we're working on a capital expansion for an industrial plant, they would have submitted an air permit through CARB that would have VOCs and they would have already been charged, or they would have had a submittal fee. As the construction company providing those services, then we would have those emissions in our scope 3 emissions as part of the services we're providing. That would be double counting those emissions that were already being a fee associated with them. So I'm wondering how that's going to be eliminated. 3, I've looked through the GHG protocol, and if we're going to be operating inside of California, I don't see any good emissions factors for locally sourced products. So if we're going to be bringing them in, is California or CARB going to be creating these emissions factors? Let's say if we source some local steel, some local PVC, is CARB going to be using already pre-generated emissions factors, or are you going to be working with UCLA to generate those? And if so, how long is that going to take? And 4, for the S&P 500 companies that were evaluated, were any of those companies construction companies? From what I've seen, they're all manufacturing based utilities companies, but I haven't seen one construction company that's been evaluated. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. On deck, we have Jason Fox. Up now, we have Stephanie Jones. Stephanie, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Good morning. This is Stephanie Jones with Environmental Defense Fund. Thank you so much, Chair Randolph, Dr. Burgess, and CARB staff for holding this workshop and for the other key steps you are taking to engage the public and prepare to implement California's climate risk disclosure laws. EDF strongly supports these initiatives to improve transparency from companies regarding their greenhouse gas emissions and climate-related financial risks. We work in California, across the United States, and in other jurisdictions around the world, including Europe, and we apply expertise in science, economics, law, and private sector partnerships to find practical, lasting solutions. As Californians know all too well, the impacts of climate change are no longer just an abstract projection about the future. They are here with immense consequences for people, communities, and businesses. At the same time, the clean energy transition and other shifts in markets, policy, and technology to mitigate and manage climate impacts are well underway, bringing new opportunities. So amid these dynamics, the common sense step of standardizing corporate climate risk disclosures will enable California consumers, investors, and members of the public to make better informed business and investment decisions. As CARB undertakes this implementation process, EDF and many of our partners on this call are here to support. In our comments, EDF provided analysis relevant to the threshold coverage questions on which CARB's presentation focused today. as well as detail on key substantive areas in which EDF has deep institutional expertise, including on voluntary carbon credits, on methane emissions reporting from the oil and gas sector, and other areas as well. We look forward to continuing to provide information and insights that can support CARB in efficiently developing strong and practical regulations to implement California's vital climate risk disclosure laws.
Thank you, Stephanie. On deck, we have Darby Gottlieb. Up now, we have Jason Fox. Jason, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, Jason Fox with the California Society of CPAs, also providing comments with the American Institute of CPAs. Thank you again for this workshop and the opportunity to engage. As the trusted providers of assurance services across industry, CPAs play a key role in ensuring accurate and reliable data, including emissions data for market participants, regulators, and the broader public. We look forward to collaborating with CARB as this regulatory framework is developed to ensure it is workable for all stakeholders. We appreciate the comments around the regulatory timeline and the recent enforcement notice. However, we're particularly interested in additional clarity around the implementation timeline, especially the reporting and assurance requirements if initial reported data is potentially incomplete or based on a good faith effort, which could make assurance challenging on that data. We're also focused on more broadly on the assurance provisions that will be in the regulations, particularly looking at how we can help ensure they are workable and aligned with established standards and other reporting and assurance frameworks used in other jurisdictions. Thank you, and we look forward to sharing our insights throughout the process and helping shape this important framework. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate you being here and the depth of expertise that you're representing. For some of your comments, I'll refer you to our enforcement advisory that we put out. There's a link on our website to that, link in the slides. Hopefully that provides you what you need in terms of some of the themes you were talking about. But don't think you're getting out of here without homework, particularly interested in any thoughts your group might have around our revenue or doing business in California definitions, given who you represent. So taking away homework. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Jason. On deck, we have Janie Hines. Up now, we have Darby Gottlieb. Darby, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, thank you so much. Darby Gottlieb with AdvaMed. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today. AdvaMed is the largest trade association representing the medical technology industry. Our companies develop, manufacture, and distribute technologies, devices, equipment, diagnostic tests, and health information systems that are transforming healthcare through earlier disease detection, less invasive procedures, and more effective treatments. MedTech in general is a $32.6 billion industry in the state of California, which includes a presence of a large presence of small emerging companies, along with more established, mature companies. We engage throughout the legislative process and share throughout that process the logistical burden that's placed on medical technology companies, specifically around the requirements to track emissions, not only for the California sites and products, but also tracking emissions from distant upstream and downstream supply chains that are seldom overseen or owned by the same company there. So with this in mind, and we have submitted public comments to this effect as well, but we urge CARB to align the reporting requirements with federal and international reporting standards already in place to avoid duplicative reporting and prevent capturing scope 3 emissions multiple times. We think this would help streamline the logistical burden for companies and also ensure that emissions are being reported in an accurate way and allow continued on-time production and delivery of essential medical technologies to patients. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Darby. Appreciate you taking the time to be here and for your statements. One of the things we'll be particularly interested in exploring further with you and others is how exactly to take the existing protocols and fit them into a regulatory structure. So as we evolve in these conversations, we'll be interested in discussing that more with you and the entities that you represent. Thanks, Darby.
Thank you, Darby. On deck, we have Brian Beering, and up now we have Janie Hines. Janie, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, thank you so much for the workshop today. I'm Janie Hine, and I'm with Covington and Burling. I'm based in our San Francisco office. And first, I want to thank CARB for your work and appreciate the task ahead of you. And I'm grateful for your transparency. I have a couple clarification questions. The first relates to timing. It was very helpful to hear from Senator Wiener at the top of today's presentation about maintaining the timelines for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions reporting. Will scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions be due on any particular date in 2026, or will it be any time within that year? We think that's an important clarification question for companies that are preparing for compliance. Second, we have a question about some lingering ambiguity. Of course, CARB identified some areas already in its presentation that it is seeking to address through its regulations. I did want to call out one perhaps unintentional ambiguity that relates to SB 261's adoption of the TCFD/ISSB framework for climate-related financial risk reporting. So technically, a report that strictly follows every pillar and recommendation of the TCFD and ISSB framework would include scope 1 and 2 emissions disclosure. However, the most logical reading of SB 261 is that it does not require scope 1 and 2 emissions disclosure because SB 253 quite clearly addresses GHG emissions disclosure. We would just encourage CARB to clarify this and make clear the extent to which SB 261 reports do not require scope 1 and 2 emissions reporting, as those are already required by SB 253. And then the third point I wanted to highlight is that in addition to clearly explaining how parent-subsidiary relationships will be defined in the regulations, we would encourage CARB to resolve some remaining ambiguity concerning whether parent-level reporting will be required when a subsidiary is in scope. So it's clear that consolidated parent-level reporting is allowable per SB 219, but it may be helpful to provide some worked examples about when such parent-level reporting is required. For example, this is particularly relevant in the case where there is a foreign parent that has a US-based subsidiary that meets the definition of doing business in California and the revenue thresholds. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Janie. Really appreciate you being on, and you bring a wealth of expertise and experience to the conversation. So I'm really glad to see you participating. To your first question about timelines for reporting, we'll certainly want to develop that as part of our regulatory development process. In terms of the other two issues you flagged, would definitely be interested in exploring those further, and really appreciate you raising them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janie. On deck, we have John Scheidler. Up now, we have Brian Beering. Brian, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Good morning. This is Brian Beering with the American Clean Power Association of California. We represent utility scale wind, solar, geothermal, and transmission developers in California and throughout the West. I first off want to thank CARB staff for the informative presentation. It answered a lot of the questions I think we had about where things stood after we submitted comments on the RFI. One issue that I didn't hear covered in the presentation was related to companies that participate or have business in California as a result of participating in wholesale electricity markets. We would appreciate further clarification on that issue. The CAISO is working on implementing an EDAM design. There's legislation to regionalize the grid, and I think it's an important issue to help clarify how those companies that aren't actually doing business in California but are participating in a wholesale electricity market might be regulated under SB 253 and 261. The other question I had was related to the timeline. I appreciated some of the clarifications you provided to Ms. Hine and Mr. Fox. We've had similar questions about the SB 261 implementation timeline and sort of how that's going to overlay with the rulemaking. We did see the enforcement guidance, but are still getting some questions around, the scope of assurances that Mr. Fox was questioning. And then the other issue related to parents and subsidiaries. I just emphasize Ms. Hine's comments on that is something that I think would be helpful to clarify, particularly with the upcoming deadline of January 1st, 2026. Thanks for the opportunity to provide the comments.
Thanks, Brian. Great to see you in the mix. I appreciate it. Happy to work with you on some of these issues, of course.
Thank you, Brian. On deck, we have Catherine Atkin. Up now, we have John Scheidler. John, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you very much, and thank you, CARB, for this presentation today. I'm the Managing Director of Omnex FuturePast. We are an accredited greenhouse gas verification body in California and also with ANAB nationally and internationally. My concern is about the verification of Scope 3 emissions. If you look at the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, there are 3 ways that they suggest that they can be quantified. The first way is data from value chain entities themselves. The second way is life cycle assessment data from databases. And the third way is spend data. So as a verification body, we ask that CARB clarify in the rule which Scope 3 data sources will be allowed for reporting purposes and the implications of that for assurance providers. For example, spend data is often generated by black box models that cannot be verified. There is no way to know what's inside them. And as a VVB, we will be held accountable for the assurance we provide on these emissions. And whether it's reasonable or limited doesn't really matter. So we're very concerned about how the regulation will define Scope 3 emissions data and the assurance related to it. If you could provide any clarity on that, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. Yes, definitely understand that, of course, we're going to need clean rules, that both support our regulatory development process so and meet the Office of Administrative Law requirements and then provide company reporting and verification clarity. I'm looking forward to working with you as the process moves along. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. On deck, we have Renato Vidovich. Up now, we have Catherine Atkin. Catherine, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Good morning, Catherine Atkin, Director of CARB and Accountable. First, I want to thank Chair Randolph and the CARB team for the work you've already done, exemplified by the presentation today, including initial staff concepts for key implementation issues, and for the work you will be undertaking in the coming months in advance of first reporting in 2026. CARB and Accountable had the opportunity to develop the original bill policy that became Senator Scott Wiener's SB 253. We played a policy and advisory role over the 3 years as it made its way through the legislature and also acted as co-sponsor along with California Environmental Voters, Ceres, and the Greenlining Coalition. Throughout this process, we were comforted by the knowledge of CARB's historic global leadership and track record of game-changing environmental and climate goals, and confident they would ensure California delivers on the promise of SB 253 and 261. We worked diligently with Senator Wiener and in partnership with others to ensure that SB 253 was fit for purpose, built on existing policies to minimize reporting burdens, including the identification of the globally recognized GHG protocol as the applicable emissions accounting standard. We are pleased to see that CARB's initial staff concepts for doing business in California and revenue threshold build on existing California law and look forward to continued value for building on what is in both laws, what has been proven to work in other global reporting regimes. We see the earlier information request in today's workshop as a strong beginning to an implementation process that creates order and certainty for companies while also ensuring that the finalized regulations support the ambition and core policy elements enshrined into both disclosure laws, including assured and comprehensive full scope reporting and the development of infrastructure for GHG emissions data reporting and public transparency for a wide range of stakeholders that is required in SB 253. The CARB also has an opportunity to build on its history of innovation and location in technology-forward California to develop smart digital first solutions that minimize the corporate resources required to meet reporting requirements while ensuring robust reporting. Thank you for all your work. We look forward to supporting the agency throughout this process.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Appreciate your support and, of course, your continued engagement.
Thank you, Catherine. On deck, we have Dana Weiss. Up now, we have Renata Vidovic. Renata, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and provide your comment.
Hello, my name is Renata Vidovic, and I'm a sustainability strategist. I have worked for 2 multi-billion-dollar companies and have prepared their scope 1, 2, and 3 GHG emissions. I've also been through limited and reasonable insurance for scope 1 and 2, meaning for 3 years in a row, meaning I do have some amount of understanding of the timeline on how this goes. I'm a little concerned about the timing for the reporting requirements. I keep seeing January 1st being stated pretty much everywhere for getting these reports out. And I do want to give some context to people who have not been through this before. Getting assurance takes about 60 days, which means you would need to start November 1st in order to get anything done by January 1st. In order to get started November 1st with assurance, you need to compile all of your data probably by October 1st, meaning you have to cut off your data by September 30th, meaning you're not going to get any of your September utility data for any of your locations, meaning you are left to estimate about 4 to 5 months of data in order to get assurance done on time, which I do find dubious if we are trying to come at this from a scientific point of view for any kind of actual climate, improvement and or tracking. So I would really like some clarification as to what the January 1st deadline means, when these numbers are actually expected to be reported to CARB. Is it, by the end of the year, by the end of the quarter? And if CARB is expecting a January 1st deadline for the previous year's data, what is the thought process behind being okay with up to a quarter of estimated data?
Well, I want to be sure we're all referring to the same thing. So it's certainly the case that under SB 253, that scope 1 and 2, that limited assurance is asked for via statute for 2026 with reasonable assurance starting in 2030. So I want to make sure that that is what we're referring to. For the January 1st deadline has to do with the requirements of SB 261 and the climate risk reporting that needs to be happening there. We'll be putting out a draft regulation for SB 253. We'll be putting out a draft regulation by the end of the year, and hopefully that provides some help with some of the specifics that I think we're talking about. But I want to be clear, the scope 1 and 2 limited assurance for 2026 is the statutory requirement.
Thank you, Renata. On deck, we have Susanna Pilkerton. Up now, we have Dana Weiss. Sorry. Dana, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and provide your comment.
Thank you. This is Dana Weiss of Verdani Partners. I'm also a resident of California. As a company that supports voluntary and mandatory reporting for primarily large commercial real estate investment managers and fund managers, our clients manage funds for their investors and their individual, and those funds are usually made of individual commercial real estate assets that are often held as joint ventures. With this in mind, we seek clarity on the following regarding partnership and reporting and revenue. Would investment managers and fund managers, such as our clients, need to be individually report, or would they be part of their investor reporting requirements? Additionally, how would joint venture revenues from individual real estate investments be apportioned to the partners involved? Additionally, we seek clarification on what measures, if any, are being proposed to mandate or clarify the minimum level of alignment and completeness for TCFD in SB 261 reporting, specifically given that TCFD is heavily laden with statements like reporting entities should consider disclosing or consider including. In these instances, how will CARB differentiate between what is required and suggested? And as a follow-up question, portions of the 2019 TCFD were superseded by TCFD 2021. Is it appropriate to assume that for those instances, TCFD 2021 should be followed as the minimum given the official superseded status? Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dana.
Dana.
In the interest of time, I'll just touch on something really briefly since you brought up a theme that we too are trying to reinforce today, which is that for our regulatory development process, we'll be looking to align as much as possible with existing GHG protocols and requirements. But you're absolutely right that when we come up against language of, require versus softer language like should or should consider, that's really the point at which, the rubber hits the road in terms of what we can and can't put in a regulation. So regulatory language that we'll be looking to develop will need to include language like require. We cannot meet various regulatory standards if we include some of that softer language. So what we're really looking forward to as part of this process of engagement is trying to understand where those flexibilities currently exist in the reporting protocols that are commonly used by businesses and how to adapt that language into a regulatory framework.
Thank you, Dana. On deck, we have Jake Raskoff. Up now, we have Susanna Pilkerton. Susanna, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, my name is Susanna Pilkerton, and I'm with Agendi. We're a global sustainability consulting firm, and I am based here in Sacramento. I have two questions, one of which I think was just answered, so I'll just reiterate that guidance for 253 reporting timeline, especially for companies who have a fiscal year that might end after January 26 or after sometime in the spring, is highly necessary and requested, and thank you for your work on this. And then the second question is CARB considering managing a database or a compilation of emissions disclosures, ideally with a set emissions intensity per revenue reported to support Scope 3 improvements year over year? One of the great things about this is hopefully the Scope 3 ambiguity will lessen, but would love to see and hear what CARB is planning to do to support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. On deck, we have Becky Tohi. Up now, we have Jake Raskoff. Jake, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thanks so much. This is Jake Raskoff. I am a director with Ceres. We are a network of institutional investors and companies that are focused on climate risks and their sustainability strategies. First of all, just really want to thank the CARB staff for all their hard work on this and for a great workshop here today. This has been really helpful. The feedback in CARB's comment docket, as well as the feedback that Ceres heard from our member companies, overwhelmingly stated that one of CARB's primary goals should be interoperability with other reporting standards. So it's encouraging to hear that drive. Nearly every company Ceres heard from is already reporting voluntarily and is preparing to comply with the EU CSRD or mandatory disclosure regulations that are under development elsewhere that adhere to the ISSB standards. So based on the feedback we've heard from our members, we recommended in our RFI response that CARB should give reporting entities a menu of acceptable reporting frameworks that would satisfy compliance with the laws, which would presumably include at a minimum the ESRS standards that underpin the EU CSRD. The ISSB standards obviously are recognized by name in these laws. And after reviewing the comment file for the RFI, we again recommend that CARB explicitly provide reporting entities with that clear menu that includes those reporting frameworks and any others that satisfy the law's provisions. And then lastly, I think other people have already mentioned sort of the fact that the TCFD recommendations have been superseded by the ISSB standards. I think the companies in our networks would like a broad approach to acceptable frameworks initially, but we would love to see CARB review and revise that list as appropriate and encourage a shift away from TCFD aligned reporting and towards the ISSB standards, which are really more designed with capital markets in mind and more comparable for consumers of the disclosures, primarily investors. So thank you again to the CARB team.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your continued support and work on these issues. Just not to sound like a broken record. But in terms of how we adapt some of these options or menus, into a regulatory framework is going to be a really critical underpinning of how to move forward and how to make sure that, we're both writing a regulation that meets all of our legal specificity and clarity requirements, but also provides the kind of streamlining that I think you are advocating for is going to be the real crux of the work. So as we continue to all work together on this, ideas and thoughts there are definitely welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. On deck, we have Samantha Weinberg. Up now, we have Becky Tohey. Becky, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi there. Thank you for your work pushing this bill forward and for the workshop. My name is Becky Tohey. I'm with GSI Environmental, and we've worked with a range of companies in other jurisdictions complying with CSRD or ISSB. As 261 points to TCFD rather than ISSB, I'm looking for clarity from CARB on what a good faith disclosure entails. And similar to what Ms. Weiss and Mr. Raskoff just brought up, really about language on what's required versus what TCFD suggests in alignment with global standards. So just for a little bit more granularity, because it seems like others are sharing this pain point, companies are going to need clarity on what that good faith gesture entails. So do they need to have a climate scenario analysis completed by the reporting deadline? Can they commit to doing a climate scenario analysis? TCFD does not mandate specific reduction targets, but rather targets aligned with their strategy. So is the intent that all companies have a climate-related target integrated into their strategy? So there's a lot of granularity in TCFD and ISSB that is going to need to be parsed out for companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. On deck, we have Brian Koloji. Up now, we have, I'm looking for Samantha Weinberg. Samantha, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Great, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm Samantha Weinberg. I am with Agendi, we're a global sustainability consulting firm, and I appreciate all the work you've been doing to answer very many questions that everyone has on this work. And I have one more question on timeline clarifications. We've been talking about having kind of regulations finalized or drafted, for end of year. But with the SB 261 deadline being January 1 of 2026, I was hoping to get some clarification on if there's an expectation that there will be clarity around who's in scope in terms of definition of doing business in California and the definition of revenue, with sufficient time for companies to know if they're in scope prior to that reporting deadline for SB 261, or if it's anticipated that the SB 261 deadline of January 1, 2026 would be altered.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Appreciate it. So the January 1 SB 261 deadline is legally in statute, that statute holds. We are looking at, in response to, big interest around doing business in what doing business in California means and what revenue means to help provide that kind of clarity. I would say I'll use this as a jumping off point to advertise, that if those definitions as proposed by staff, don't do the trick, don't provide the clarity that the folks you represent need, we definitely need to hear that feedback so we can, start running in place to help refine that. We do want to provide regulatory clarity. We do want to provide, that kind of direction and understand that folks need it. So really asking for all of your help, to weigh in and take, a really good look at what we've put forward, today. This isn't written in stone. If more modifications are needed, we really want to hear from you. I think you all are probably best equipped to understand whether or not, or to know whether or not these potential ideas around these definitions provide what you and your clients need. So really looking for your engagement on that. So thank you, Samantha, for the opportunity to do a little advertisement for where we could use some help so that we can get you what you need. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Samantha. On deck, we have Richard Chandler. Up now, we have Brian Kaloji. Brian, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
My name is Brian Kaloji, and I'm with the Kaloji Corporation, who has a goal of exceeding the Governor Newsom's mandate for removal of carbon dioxide and achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. We built the only nature-based carbon capture and sequestration facilities in Kern County, California. We have 5 facilities now, up to 2,000 tons per year of carbon capture using natural and working lands for carbon sequestration, and using patented technologies from the Kaloji Corporation. What we are asking from CARB is for accommodation for natural and working land carbon sequestration with their calculation tools, and also with crediting, greenhouse gas crediting using nature-based technologies, such as free air carbon dioxide enrichment that's been researched for 40 years by the United States Department of Energy, and now patented and funded by CDFA in Kern County. Patented by Kaloji Corp and funded operations and projects funded by CDFA. So we're hoping that you'll accommodate us with greenhouse gas calculation tools for nature-based biosequestration. That's my comment. Thank you so much, CARB, Chair Randolph, board members, and all the CARB staff for all your hard work in achieving carbon neutrality.
Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate your leadership in this space.
Sorry, was muted. Thanks, Brian. On deck, we have Adriana Dominguez. Up now, we have Richard Chandler, excuse me. Richard, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hello, my name is Richard Chandler. I'm a California resident employed by an out-of-state Fortune 500 company. I have a statement and a question. I'll start with the statement. The goals of SB 253 and SB 261 are laudable. However, depending on how they are implemented, they could have unintended consequences, including loss of employment for work-from-home Californians such as myself. These laws are aimed at those, quote unquote, doing business in California. If CARB follows the standard established by the California Franchise Tax Board for doing business in California, it would create a low threshold for compliance and could result in companies with only a small presence in California deciding to leave the state and release its California employees. For example, one element of how FTB defines, quote unquote, doing business in California is tied to payroll. More specifically, FTB declares a company is doing business in California if it has a payroll of at least approximately $73,000 per year, which could amount to as few as 1 or 2 employees, even if the company does not have a physical presence in the state, such as no power plants, no manufacturing, no brick and mortar buildings, and does not have emissions in the state. If CARB adopts the same low threshold, there's a high likelihood that employers will simply lay off their California employees rather than adopt a reporting requirement and the associated compliance costs that affect the entirety of their company outside of the state. My request is that CARB not adopt an unnecessarily low threshold for how quote unquote doing business in California is defined for purposes of SB 253 and 261, which could lead to a loss of employment in the state. Several companies expressed this concern to CARB on this topic during the public comment period that closed in March. They asked us for CARB to take those comments into account when drafting the final regulations. My question, slide 13 describes a formal timeline with milestones. Can the website be updated with specific dates and milestones? Also, by when this year will a fairly indicative set of regulations be available for review short of published final regulation? Companies are making decisions here in the near term regarding whether they want to take on this new reporting obligation or potentially to consider letting California employees go. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. On deck, we have Melinda Rausch. Up now, we have Adriana Dominguez. Adriana, feel free to unmute yourself and please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, thank you for the presentation and for the space. My name is Adriana Dominguez, and I'm still a bit unclear about something. If the law applies to a subsidiary company, does that mean the entire parent company has to disclose, even some of all of its operations are outside California? Also, I would like to clarify whether companies are still required to pay a fee to CARB, or if that's no longer the case under SB 219. Thank you.
Sorry,
Not-
Adriana. Oh, go ahead, Bob.
Sorry, Stephen. We're trying to get an answer, but I didn't entirely gather what the question was. If you could reiterate it, it might be easier for me to respond.
Yes, I'm unclear if the law applies to a subsidiary company in California. Does that mean that the entire parent company has to disclose?
That's actually one of the questions that we had anticipated. If you know the regulation, the SB 219 says if a subsidiary company within the state is covered, then the parent company has the option or can simply report their entire corporate numbers, especially if they're already doing that. The regulation does not, at this point, the way we read it, say you can or cannot report at the local level or disclose. So that's clearly one of the questions that we as staff are actively working on.
Okay, thank you. And what about the fee? Do the companies are still required to pay a fee to CARB, or that's no longer the case?
There's a couple different questions on that, and that needs to be worked out because this 219 said that you no longer have to pay the fee at the time that you file. So that would imply that there is still a fee there, but again, that probably becomes a regulatory question that we need to follow up on to clarify if that's true.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Adriana.
Thank you.
On deck, we have Teresa Baker. Up now, we have Matt Dona. Matt, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and provide your comment.
Hi, good afternoon. Matt Donath with Trio. We are a clean energy and sustainability consulting firm. A few questions, and a lot of these are reiterating comments that we heard earlier today. First, on 261, reiterating a few comments that we heard on just needing additional clarification on the requirements of what applies from TCFD, particularly the fact that TCFD and ISSB both either recommend or require greenhouse gas disclosure as well. So we're trying to get in any information there if that's going to be intended under 261 or if that would just be for SB 253. And then similarly with 261, understanding that the enforcement notice that you put out earlier this year applies only to SB 253. That allows for the good faith effort for next year. Wondering if that is a possibility of discussion for SB 261 as well, given that now we're hearing today the regulation won't be developed until the end of the year, and we have the January 1st deadline for reporting under 261. So again, just looking for a little bit of clarification there on on what's going to be required under 261, and then the timeline and potential for a similar enforcement notice of good faith effort. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Matt. I'll just take the opportunity to say, definitely hearing some themes coming through as lifted up and echoed in some of the comments that you've made, that we will definitely be working on. These are really important themes for us to be hearing. So we're taking all of this in and trying to really identify, okay, universally, what are the things we should be working on with you all to identify for clarifications for potential reporters under the program. So I just wanted to take, the opportunity you presented to make sure to be explicit about that. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. And I realized I accidentally skipped over Melinda. So on deck will be Melinda Rausch, but up now will be Teresa Baker. Teresa, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and provide your comment.
Thank you so much. Yes, Teresa Baker. I'm with MetLife, a financial services company. And these questions, several questions have already been asked to try to get clarification on timing. And Sydney, I certainly hear you. You have to, certainly comply with the requirements of issuing regulations. But our understanding was that there would be greater clarity provided by July 1. And is there going to be additional clarity in terms of timing, specific timing in terms of when for SB 253 in 2026 we would need to file our disclosure? Additionally, what the components under SB 261 due on January 1, 2026 would be included? We are actively looking to make sure we provide and submit good faith, disclosures, but we do want to understand the work that would be needed to be incorporated right now to make sure that those disclosures adequately meet the requirements of the statutes. So will there be additional guidance in terms of what is included in terms of the requirements and timing by July 1st? Or is that something that's going to be later in the year? And then how will that impact the timing? I know you've gotten this question in several different ways already, but it is a source of a lot of inquiry, and I'm sure that it will be helpful for all of us to know what exactly we'll be doing when.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes, happy to share information as it becomes available. Really appreciate that the issues being raised here are all in good faith. We have navigated these types of reporting issues and other regulations, so are very familiar with this. Just in terms of timeline, the January 1 deadline is set in statute via SB 261, and of course we'll be undertaking the regulatory process this year. And so I think that one of the things you're hopefully hearing from us, is that we understand that these issues are important. We understand that there's some existing precedent that both statutes point to, in terms of us being able to, in terms of encouraging us to incorporate and align where we can. Also overlaid with needing to go through the regulatory development process. Some of the critical threshold questions that we've identified today, I think, indicate, that fundamentally we want to work with you all to identify, some of the critical foundation for who is covered, and that includes both the how do you define revenue and the doing business in California question, and that is really foundational to our work going forward. So again, I would encourage folks, to the extent you have ideas on that, I think that'll really help us start to get our arms around some of these other questions that are being presented here today as well.
Thank you, Teresa. On deck, we have Chloe Stanton. Up now, we have Melinda Rausch. Melinda, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, my name is Melinda Roach. I'm representing a large private company that may or may not be in scope. I am following up on previous questions on implementation of timeline, although it is a bit repetitive theme in this call. The question does not seem to have a clear answer as of yet. If my understanding is correct, my first question would be, are we no longer getting an announcement on July the 1st? My second question is, once CARB finalizes definitions of revenue and doing business in California, do we at this point know which month in 2026 companies will be required to submit their 2025 data? Or would it be accurate to say that the timeline for reporting is still unknown and we will have to wait until the end of the year? My final comment as a corporation would be, if key definitions are not finalized until late 2025, we respectfully ask CARB to ensure that companies are given sufficient time to collect, prepare, and publish high quality reports for public disclosure. A January 1st, 2026 reporting deadline under the circumstances would not be reasonable or fair given the time required to operational compliance after definitions are released for companies who have not started data collection or any sustainability efforts. We respectfully suggest that a modification to the January 1st, 2026 deadline would be necessary if the specific definitions of revenue and doing business in California are not finalized until the end of the year. Proceeding without clear definitions until that late stage may create confusion and gives the appearance of a lack of transparency in the implementation process. Thank you.
Thanks, Melinda. Appreciate the opportunity to, kind of clarify. And, I definitely understand, that we're all many of us are kind of new to each other. And so, to the extent I'm able to provide some clarity here today, I'm happy to, and then happy to have follow-up questions. I do want to clarify, a regulatory development by the end of the year. We will provide information throughout this year as we co-create it together with you and develop it out. I hope that's one theme that came through on one of the slides that we presented as part of the staff presentation, is that the public process and the stakeholder engagement process is an iterative one that will occur, over the coming months. So, I'm worried that one of the things that may have been transmitted, as part of your statements that you just made is, the concern that potentially we would only put information out last minute, end of the year, and then everyone be forced to comply. I hope what you're seeing from us is that, CARB, in terms of our engagement process with stakeholders, we really try to put information out as we have it, try to solicit feedback as we have ideas. And so you're seeing some of that, I'll just say, co-creation today. We're putting out, these threshold definitions of our initial staff concepts for, revenue and doing business in California, and really seeking to get feedback on, is this the right one? Did we miss something? Is this not provide the level of specificity that's needed? And looking for opportunities to co-create with you all. So in terms of, the development process and getting information out, expect many, many more conversations like this to come. Also, I really want to emphasize that, active engagement and feedback from you all is really the thing that's needed at this point. Hopefully you don't feel like this is a waiting process of, CARB put something out, now we're going to wait to see what they come up with. We're really looking for that active conversation with you all to figure out, did we get it right? What more is needed? Does this not hit the mark, etc.
Thank you, Melinda. On deck, we have Kyle Horn, and up now we have Chloe Stanton. Chloe, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi there. My name is Chloe Stanton. I am chiming in from Wesco International, a global electrical distribution company. I think I'd like to maybe just echo some of the comments today. We were likely one of the companies represented in your S&P 500 research. So we have been on over a decade-long journey at this point to establish our GHG monitoring and management programs. This is related to voluntary and existing regulatory obligations. This is really a significant cross-functional effort involving large-scale education to build requisite experience and expertise within our organization. I do worry that deviating from or adding requirements to the existing corporate standard from the greenhouse gas protocol may introduce undue variability in our disclosures. I worry that this could lead to potential uncertainty within our organization, but also to regular readers of our reporting. And I also am somewhat concerned that given the timelines kind of suggested today for delivery of final guidance, hearing that this could be collaborative over the coming months, I do worry that deviation from existing standards will be difficult to achieve for 2026 reports related to timeline feasibility as well. Just speaking from our experience, we have already developed a suite of internal controls and infrastructure around our existing process that cannot be shifted easily, and that is by design. Even one of the suggestions that I have is to potentially solve for some of the challenges discussed around ensuring regulatory grade carbon reporting. I request that CARB maintain close GHGP alignment, but potentially require companies to publish a structured to your tailoring and detailed methodology document as well. This has been put forth by several other voluntary and regulatory standards and could kind of thread that needle a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Chloe. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your engagement and your expertise that you're bringing to this. Also appreciate the suggestion about how we might be able to, recognize the differences between the voluntary reporting that's currently done and how we might ease their transition into a regulatory framework. So looking forward to talking with you more about that.
Thank you. On deck, we have Keller Wood. Up now, we have Kyle Horn. Kyle, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Yes, hi, my name is Kyle Horn. I'm from Children's Hospital Los Angeles. So I just wanted to first personally thank CARB and our senators for this important work. And then also just to acknowledge that California nonprofit healthcare organizations are coming up against a lot of financial headwinds this year. And as you can imagine, our leadership and our government affairs team time is greatly constrained across a lot of our federal considerations. So we really do need meaningful time to prepare for any regulations as we work to maintain also our high levels of medical care. So my questions theme has come up in the feedback period, but I wanted to ask a maybe slightly more specific question based on the enforcement notice that was dated December 5th, 2024. So as it's been mentioned, I saw that there is the timeline of July 1st, 2025 to announce the regulation standards for SB 253. So I have two questions. I believe in another response about maybe 30 minutes ago, you had stated that standards for SB 253 might be coming through by the end of the year. Did I misunderstand that, or is the July 1 deadline being pushed again for that? And then my second question is, within that December letter, I didn't see any timeline for SB 261 regulation standards, yet 261 has an earlier due date of January 1st, 2026. So is there a specific date that we can expect to receive regulation standards? That way it can provide us enough time to meet the deadlines. And I do appreciate just two questions ago, leaning into the idea around co-creating the regulations. That is greatly appreciated. And what I do think would be really helpful, though, is to know when the co-creating ends and then when we can tell our leadership we'll have concrete regulatory standards. That way we can help mitigate some of the uncertainty that currently exists. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyle. Yeah, and appreciate you tuning in, and of course for all the important work that your group does. So I will kind of go back to a few things that we heard at the start of the day, which is that for 253, one of the things that Senator Wiener really reinforced, I think, recognizing some of this uncertainty, is the statutory direction that for SB 253, that scope 1 and 2 be reported in 2026 for calendar year 2025. Of course, scope 3 a little bit later, 2027 for 2026 emissions. The statutory deadline for SB 261, which requires businesses that do over 500 million in revenue in California annually to develop and post climate risk disclosure reports on their website by January 1. I think maybe some of the confusion is that we all tend to talk about 253 and 261 kind of together. So hopefully bifurcating that helps a little bit. I realize doesn't get you all the way there. And then, yes, we'll be looking to develop a regulation by the end of the year. And I think a lot of this is really contingent on actually all of you. So we need help, and we're asking for help today in terms of getting feedback on some of these, basic threshold definitions, which also might be helpful, Kyle, in terms of weighing in on, in terms of, is what we're proposing in terms of doing business in California and in terms of that revenue definition the right one? Should we be thinking about it in a different way? That's really going to be a really fundamental underpinning for who is captured in all of this. I just want to do like a quick time check. We have really been, impressed by the level of participation that folks have. Really appreciate all of you recognizing this important work and working with us to sort through, some of the complicating details that come along with this. We're currently over time. We have about 27 more commenters to go. Thomas Marine, you are our last person. We're going to, basically close off with what we have and take the rest of you 27. Of course, I want to reinforce that, if you didn't get a chance to speak today, of course, opportunities to talk with us. You can email us at climatedisclosure@arb.ca.gov. We're always happy to chat. But really want to thank you for the level of participation today. Do want to take the questions that we have in the queue, of course, but we're gonna cut it off there. That'll take us about an hour over our scheduled time. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I'll just mention for that we will be having everyone go for their first time first before we do any repeated comments. So on deck, we have Allison Diamond, and up now we have Heather Wood. Heather, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and provide your comment.
Hi, yes, this is Heather Wood. I'm the Senior Manager of Controls and Governance at TTX Company, headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have business throughout California from a maintenance perspective. We're in the rail industry, owned by the big four Class 1 U.S. railroads. I'm reaching out today really to seek clarification regarding the term good faith effort that CARB mentioned in their December enforcement memo. Specifically, I'd like to understand what is meant by this term in the context. Does it imply that anything submitted will be considered a good faith effort, even if that limited assurance is not obtained? Or is there another level of assurance or criteria that is expected to be met? I'm sure this echoes Becky Tui's comments and a few others. And then second, additionally, could you clarify the standard that will be used to obtain limited assurance? Will that be based on AICPA standards? Or is the expectation that those assurance providers are following IAASB standards? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So one thing, just given your particular situation, that I'd be really interested in, just taking moderator privileges here at this point, is that given the situation of your company of being largely outside of California, but doing business inside of California, really would be interested in your thoughts on this revenue and doing business in California definition. Sounds like you're uniquely positioned to weigh in and see if you think that is, helpful or needs more clarification. I would say that in terms of your assurance questions, there were a couple of themes that came up that I just wanted to clarify. I believe you mentioned absolute assurance. The terms mentioned in SB 253 are both limited and reasonable assurance. So I just want to make sure we're speaking the same language there. Some of the other questions that you posed, kind of go to why the regulatory process is so iterative and why we need all of your feedback and help, because defining these terms will be particularly critical as we move forward this year. So thank you for your continued engagement.
Thank you, Heather. On deck, we have Ann Howard. Up now, we have Allison Diamond. Allison, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Great. Thank you so much. My name's Allie Diamond. I'm within Thesis Group, which is a global sustainability consulting firm. I really appreciate this workshop and all the work that you all are putting into this. A lot of my questions have actually been asked already, so I would just reiterate the importance of clarity on what elements of TCFD are required or what elements of ISSB IFRS S2 would be required. I think that's really important for companies who are trying to make a good faith effort to kind of know what the standard is that they'll be judged on. But I think you've heard that question really clearly. Another thing that I think you've heard pretty clearly already is this question about what a good faith effort would mean if guidance won't really be coming out on particularly on SB 261 until the end of the year. I think it would be great to give companies some clarity, like perhaps like what you did in that enforcement notice for 253 about the fact that there will be leniency and how much leniency, particularly on SB 261. And then the last question I wanted to ask that I haven't heard previously, I don't think, is to get a little bit more sense of how you're thinking about the materiality of climate risk. SB 261 does have a definition of climate risk, but it doesn't mention materiality, and it doesn't have anything similar to the SEC definition of materiality. So I'm wondering if that's intentional to encourage companies to consider and report a broader range of potential risks, or if you are expecting companies to clarify if the risks reported that they are reporting under SB 261 are or are not material under the SEC definition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison. On deck, we have Emily Joy, and up now we have Paula DePerna. Paula, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and your affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you very, very much. And my name is Paula DePerna. I am the Special Advisor for the Carbon Disclosure Project, otherwise known as CDP or vice versa. And I've been following the process with Senator Stern from the beginning. So thank you. I will echo all the thanks and all of the appreciation for the sensitivity and the sophistication of the CARB review process to get the implementation a structure to be as non-duplicative and as concrete as possible. I would just simply suggest to the Montrose team that they get in touch with us, because I didn't see any reference to CDP in their summary of voluntary programs, and not to belabor our scope, but we would be able to provide, I think, significant help on the duplication side or on the non-duplication side, as I said, as well as helping close this gap, so to speak, between legal specificity and what companies may be already doing. I can completely appreciate that there's a little bit of a gap there, and I think our structure and our alignment may be helpful. So again, thanks, and I'd love to get in touch with the Montrose team. I've already written Johnny asking for their contacts. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Paula. Really appreciate seeing you here and appreciate your continued engagement on this.
Thank you, Paula. On deck, we have Joseph Styrer. Up now, we have Emily Joy. Emily, feel free to unmute yourself. Please give your name and your affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi there. So I'm Emily. I work for Schneider Electric, and we do greenhouse gas consulting for Fortune 500 companies. You've heard this a lot today, so thank you for your patience, especially you, Sydney, with everything you've been fielding today in terms of questions. I did want to kind of make a comment on the length of time it takes to prepare a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. For scopes 1 and 2, it can be more straightforward. For scope 2, I think renewable energy should be taken into account that renewable energy such as RECs, renewable energy credits, the certification and the certificates and all the documentation may come a little bit later in the year than, let's say, the January deadline. As for scope 3, I think a full emissions inventory for scope 1 and 2 and 3 could take several weeks to several months, depending on the complexity of the company's reporting. So just wanting to note that a company with a calendar year report, even though let's say their calendar year ends December, their report might not be ready until Q2. And for a company with a fiscal year, that really greatly depends on when their fiscal year ends. But if their fiscal year ends after January, that could take possibly later than Q2. So just wanting to know if CARB is taking this into account in the implementation and the timing of the regulation. And I know I have a few seconds left, so wanted to ask as well if there's any further clarity on the platform that companies will be able to disclose on in 2026. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the feedback. In terms of the platform and reporting, are you talking about 253? Oh, sorry. I may have messed.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Haynes and Emily.
Sorry, Emily. Yeah, sorry. I just naturally muted them
fair.
after their comment. But thank you, Emily, for your comment. On deck, we have Patrick Joyce. Up now, we have Joseph Styrer. Joseph, feel free to unmute yourself. Please say your name and your affiliation and deliver your comment.
Yes, my name is Joseph Steyer. I'm with York Engineering. We're an California-based environmental compliance consulting company. And, I'm kind of been getting a lot of questions in SB 253. We're also like a California greenhouse gas verification company. So there's a lot of questions that have already been asked, and I have some questions and comments I'd like to just get in real quick in the 2 minutes I have here along those lines. One of them is, I know like California regulation is more geared toward like full reasonable assurance, like under full verification, like under the mandatory reporting regulation LCFS. So there's probably going to be a little need of clarity for what's going to be scaled down, for what's a limited assurance that's going to be required under the regulation for the first 3 years. Second, I just want to note that like since SB 253 is based on fiscal year, I think it makes most sense to have a reporting deadline rotate just based on when each company's fiscal year ends. That would seem to make the most sense for a certain amount of days after that, kind of like how SEC deadlines are along those lines. Also, just want to note about like, international corporations, if you're not incorporating California based on how I understand the regulation, it doesn't seem to be that they'd even have to comply because they're not, based on definitions, formed as a US entity along those lines. So that could probably use some clarity. I would also like to mention that want to look at the climate disclosure, EU CSRD, as that might have some good guidance in there. And then since I'm running out of time, I'll just end with this question of like, when can we expect the next update from CARB on when we'll hear the next thing? Is this moving along? As you can tell, the high interest of and the impact on potentially a lot of businesses in California. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate you participating and weighing in. I'll just say, we have been hearing a lot from various companies about so many of the themes you brought up, including the reporting on fiscal year versus calendar year. And of course, we working with you all through that process. Regarding, clarifying which corporations are potentially included in scope of these bills, that really speaks to, the need to engage with all of you on these threshold questions about what does it mean to be doing business in California and what does it mean in terms of revenue, for meeting that $1 billion annual threshold or that 500 million annual threshold. So we'll really need your help with all of that. And then with respect to reference to MRR, of course, we've grown very used to working with companies and corporations through a program, and understand that there may be lessons that we can learn that we can apply here. But of course, we're working, under direction from the legislature and the statute, in terms of, what scope of emissions we're looking to capture and who will be included in the program.
Thank you very much. On deck, we have Ann Howard, and up now we have Patrick Joyce. Patrick, feel free to unmute yourself. Please say your name and your affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, thank you. Hi, my name is Pat Joyce with KP Public Affairs based here in Sacramento, providing comments on behalf of the Investment Company Institute. For those that don't know, ICI is based in DC and is a leading trade association representing regulated, regulated investment funds. Really appreciate the presentation today. I thought it was informative and helpful. And I know it's been a reoccurring theme and feels like I'm piling on at this point, but ICI and their members have concerns over those threshold questions, the definition of doing business in California, the definition of revenue, particularly how it relates to registered investment funds, such as mutual funds and ETFs. The legislative intent behind SB 253 and SB 261 appears to be focused on operating companies doing business in California that are actually generating GHG emissions. So unlike a manufacturer utility, a mutual fund has no employees of its own. It doesn't engage in any physical operations like the production of goods or materials. So therefore is not generating any emissions such as those associated with operating companies. Do appreciate some of the initial staff concepts referenced during the presentation around revenue threshold and gross receipts. We have our tax attorneys reviewing how it might apply to income generated from investment funds, but would appreciate the opportunity to discuss the issue in further detail with CARB staff in the near term. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Pat. I really appreciate that. Appreciate that you folks, digging into the proposed definitions. I think that'll be really helpful. Just kind of putting a marker down for like moving forward and what might be useful. I think there's kind of maybe two issues wrapped up in one. One is, should we be considering various, exemptions? And if so, what basis should those exemptions be based on? Or should we be looking to, clarify some of the issues you raised through these more definitional aspects of the regulation, like doing business in California or what is revenue? I think that would be helpful. We certainly did hear, in the over 200 public comments that we received in the public docket, calls for specific exemptions, so kind of looking for opportunities to learn more about whether it's useful to, refine definitions around doing business in California and revenue, or whether it's useful to understand, if an exemption is being asked for and what the basis for that would be. I think would probably be a useful discussion moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much. On deck, we have Helen Revelas. Up now, we have Ann Howard, and feel free to unmute yourself. Please say your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Ann Howard, and I'm with the ANSI National Accreditation Board, or ANAB. We appreciate the efforts being made by CARB to initiate transparent and comparable reporting, and CARB's efforts here to engage with the public to gather this critical feedback. My comment is regarding oversight and accreditation of assurance providers, or verification bodies, as we call them, as assurance will be required. ANAB has operated an accreditation program which oversees the quality, competence, and impartiality of third-party verification bodies since 2008. The accreditation program is program neutral, meaning it can be and is paired with a variety of both voluntary and regulatory reporting and disclosure programs. ANAB is a signatory to the International Accreditation Forum multilateral recognition arrangement, meaning we get evaluated or audited to ensure that we meet international requirements for operating an accreditation program. It has been mentioned here that over 30 countries are implementing corporate climate disclosure rules, and many of those will leverage or build off existing quality infrastructure, including existing systems for third-party assurance and accreditation. Regarding the requirement for assurance and the critical need here to ensure that assurance providers are competent, free of conflicts of interest, and operate in accordance with CARB's proposed regulatory requirements, we encourage CARB to leverage existing frameworks and programs for quality assurance. This message has been stated in our public comments, and other comments have echoed that same sentiment. Additionally, on the time comments that are made here, it's also our experience that covered entities and assurance providers require advance notice on expectations so as to comply. Thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Ann. On deck, we have Gracina Mohabir, and up now we have Helen Revelas. Helen, feel free to unmute yourself. Please say your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Helen Revelis, and I comment today not on behalf of my organization, but as a 30-year environmental sustainability professional who'll be in the trenches preparing these reports. Thank you for what appears to be sincere interest in our feedback. My comments relate to the reporting deadline questions raised by several for SB 253. As you consider an appropriate deadline for the annual emission data of the previous year, I want to make it clear the necessity for as much time as possible to prepare the report. As others mentioned, it can take several months to receive the raw data that must then be calculated into emissions. The limited assurance process, as mentioned, takes 2 months typically once engaged. However, the same group of third parties will be called on to provide assurance for many, so there may be a waiting period before they are available to review your data. Additionally, if we try to rush the data collection process to get to the assurance completed before the deadline, we may not even pass assurance because too many assumptions are made. Finally, the beginning of the year is when many regulatory reports are due, as you know, in CARB, but also for other government agencies. Adding another regulatory reporting requirement at the same time of year would divert attention for this already busy group of individuals to prepare accurate compliance reports. So again, I ask that you please consider making the deadline as late in the year as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and appreciate a view from the trenches, as you put it. Definitely hope you can continue to participate in our efforts as we continue. I think your hands-on experience would be really welcomed here, especially as we start to work through some of the thornier issues that you've raised. Of course, given our just speaking to deadlines a little bit, not committing to anything specific, of course, because we'll want to work, specific deadlines out with all of you as part of the process, but we certainly have experience, phasing in our regulations and phasing in these types of requirements. So in cap and trade, we require certified emissions in August for the preceding year. So definitely have some experience with that tension you're talking about. And understand that some of this requires a glide path for success. So please continue to work with us. I think your background will be incredibly helpful as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On deck, we have Bridge Taylor. Up now, we have Gracina Mohabir. Gracina, please unmute yourself and please state your name and your affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, good afternoon. Christina Mohabir with California Environmental Voters. For those of you who don't know, EnviroVoters was one of the co-sponsors of the original legislation with SB 253, as well as a strong supporter of SB 261. And we're immensely glad to see this rulemaking process get off the ground. I first really want to express gratitude to CARB staff, Chair Randolph, as well as other presenters for such a thorough workshop. We're looking forward to the development of these rules this year, the timeline of which is much needed to give covered entities regulatory certainty. Reporting this basic information is something that many companies already do voluntarily. These groundbreaking regulations should require robust reporting and prioritize public access. We know these regs will be absolutely beneficial to inform consumers and investors on emissions-related climate considerations and improve transparency on corporate climate risks. EnviroVoters is committed to working with staff throughout this process. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much for your continued engagement on this. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. On deck, we have Kelly Meisner. Up now, we have Bridge Taylor. Bridge, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thanks very much. My name's Bridge Taylor. I'm an ESG manager with CPM, large manufacturer. My number one question is, does the staff have an opinion on the fiscal year question? We're a 930 reporter, and just want to know, obviously there's no guidance yet, but want to know what you guys think. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, well, we've definitely heard this, both today and in the public docket. So you're in good company there, understand the issue and the tension, and we'll definitely need to work with you on, sorting out these type of questions as the conversation progresses, and understanding the issue better. So appreciate you raising it.
Thank you, Bridge. On deck, we have Katie Davey, and up now we have Kelly Meisner. Kelly, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, thank you, Kelly Meisner. I'm the head of sustainability at Ventas. We are a large owner of healthcare real estate, including in California and also an S&P 500 company. First, I want to reiterate the comments from Jonathan Kendrick at the California Chamber of Commerce. Second, want to reiterate the many other comments about trying to align with the GHG protocol, understanding it has to be able to fit into a regulation. I do also want to note that the GHG protocol is working on updates that are potentially substantial revisions to the current protocol that my understanding of the timeline is that they'll be released over the next 1 to 3 years. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that and takes that into account as the regs are being developed. Third, this is kind of a general question, not expecting an immediate response, but just want to understand how CARB and the state of California will use the data reported under SB 253 and 261, and how the expected use of the data will inform the regulations and reporting requirements. And then lastly, on the timing that everyone's been asking about, I just want to throw out there that given where we are, that the final rules aren't likely to be out till the end of the year. For the first year for SB 253 for the scope 1 and 2 emissions with limited assurance, the deadline should not be until December 31st, 2026. That could potentially be moved up in future years. There is also some confusing language to me in the December 2024 enforcement letter. It says that basically the 2025 emissions can be determined from information that the reporting entity has at the time of the notice, which was December 2024, but you wouldn't have any of your 25 data at that time. So I'm not sure, maybe it's saying you can like estimate your 25 based on 24, but to me, that's not helpful. I think most reporters would rather just do their normal process, which is why having through the end of 2026 is critical given this late timeline that we're on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. Just appreciate you lifting up some of the other comments so we can understand where a lot of the main themes of today lie for moving forward. One of the things you brought up that I don't think has come up before is how we're going to be using the data. Just to provide some clarity there, we're looking to, fulfill, our mandate under statute and legislation. So 253, 261, 219, which we affectionately refer to as the 200s. And, I think as Senator Wiener and Stern laid out, that the data is really intended to help, be a benefit to consumers and investors, who are looking for this information and looking for information about where they want to put their dollars. So I'm able to provide a little bit of feedback on that one. I hope that's helpful. Thank you for continuing to engage with us.
Thank you, Kelly.
Sorry. I also wanted to, you also mentioned, you got a lot in 2 minutes. Congratulations, Kelly. I also wanted to mention your comments around the GHG protocol and that it is on a 1 to 3 year time frame for revisions. Yes, certainly have been tracking that along with, a lot of the other international kind of state of play in terms of these reporting frameworks. The GHG protocol was part of the Montrose work that was studied. So yes, we are continuing to track those and other related efforts.
Thank you, Kelly. On deck, we have Jason Langford. Up now, we have Katie Davey. Katie, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and provide your comment.
Good afternoon. Katie Davey, Executive Director with the Deary Institute of California. With regards to the SB 253 solicitation questions regarding corporate relationships, a registration process that asks identifying questions beforehand could be helpful. Example, parent or subsidiary type questions. Businesses are all structured differently, so we recommend flexibility in reporting requirements. For a more straightforward compliance process, allowing businesses to determine whether to comply at either the subsidiary or the parent level would be helpful. If a company does business in California but is a part of a larger parent company, the larger parent company's report should satisfy the requirements from the subsidiary. We recommend reporting directly to CARB. With regards to the SB 261 guidance documents are helpful as companies are working towards compliance. Companies will need plenty of time to determine what is involved with reporting and the needed reporting period. This is the first time our members will have been required to report this data, and we need to allow maximum flexibility to ensure accurate reporting. As I stated, flexibility is needed to allow the businesses to report at any time over the 2-year period. And CARB should allow for SB 261 implementation to recognize and credit existing climate risk disclosures, such as portions of the CSRD that would apply under SB 261. However, we stress the need for CARB to pay attention to the reporting costs required with existing climate risk disclosures, such as CSRD, and stress the need for harmonization across existing reporting structures. Thank you so much for this opportunity to comment and the additional information regarding the rulemaking. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie. On deck, we have Gilbert Lara. Up now, we have Jason Langford. Jason, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you so much. My name is Jason Langford. I'm with the law firm Troutman Pepper Law. We appreciate your time and your willingness to stay to hear concerns, and especially your willingness to stay late to hear all the comments. We work with several clients that are concerned about the requirements of SB 253 and 261. I think at this point, largely, a lot of these concerns have been raised, but chief among these are the definition of doing business in California and the parent subsidiary issues that, sort of Katie was just mentioning as well. We've heard various questions, sort of some specific to this. Some questions that we have heard include, would a non-California corporation be caught under SB 253 or 261? For reporting of its subsidiaries, if it only has a minor subsidiary in California that it controls, which subsidiary on its own does not meet the revenue threshold, even though on a consolidated basis, the parent does. Additionally, another question we've heard asked is, would a large entity that meets revenue thresholds, but that is not based in California and only engages in a single transaction that meets the sales threshold under the tax code, would that entity be considered to be doing business in California? Our clients would appreciate clarity on these points and believe that the regulation should only capture corporations with a strong nexus to California. A second concern relates to requirements of SB 261 and whether reporting of metrics and targets would be required under that law. Based on the law's language and the TCFD framework, we believe this is unclear. If a reporting entity did not publish such reporting metrics or targets, we also are curious whether that would cause the company's reporting to be considered inadequate or insufficient. Further, along those lines, we would appreciate additional criteria on how reporting will be judged to be inadequate or insufficient. That would be appreciated as well. And again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to come.
Hi, Jason. My name is Bob. I'm one of the staff working on the very questions that you have brought up. I'm not sure I can give you some specific answers about the parent-subsidiary relationships. We are reading the same statutes that you're reading. We have any number of business folks and some legal folks and people working through this entire, what does it mean to be doing business in California? And if you have a subsidiary, a parent may report at the parent level, but can the subsidiary report? If a company does not meet the criteria within California, but has businesses, small amount of transactions, what would be the threshold to include those? These are all questions that we are asking, and that's part of the reason we're emphasizing them today. I think folks are starting to realize it's considerably more complex than people thought at the first glance at this. So we really, really are asking these questions. We're working on them, and we're certainly looking for feedback and suggestions how we would interpret some of these things. So yeah, I look forward to hearing more from you guys and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jason. On deck, we have Thomas Marine, but up now we have Gilbert Lara. Gilbert, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Gilbert Lara, representing Biocom California, the largest life science trade association in the world, advocating for companies in California's pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical technology sectors. Thank you for the fantastic presentation and openness to make this process inclusive for all stakeholders. I'll stick to the public feedback slide on the screen and start with the initial feedback on staff concepts and themes, beginning with doing business in California, that language. We're concerned that the Rev and Tax Code Section 23101 definition may be overly broad, capturing companies with minimal California presence, but creating maximum regulatory burden for our life sciences sectors. Additional regulatory concepts, we strongly urge CARB to develop materiality thresholds for Scope 3 emissions. Our industry faces particular challenges with Scope 3. It encompasses downstream processing and upstream supply chain investments. The multiple data points make accurate assessments extremely difficult. For our needs, our industry develops life-saving medical technologies that patients depend on. Our key need is maximum alignment with federal and international reporting standards to avoid duplicative reporting and ensure continued timely delivery of essential medical technologies. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. Appreciate you hanging on and sticking with us. Appreciate the comments. Definitely hear you, and I've heard several others echo those themes as well. Moving forward, if you or the entities you represent have specific ideas about how we might temper the doing business in California definition and how that might be helpful, would be useful information to have as we start getting into developing regulatory language. Similarly for materiality, if there's specific ideas that you can share with us outside of this 2-minute threshold about the basis for that and what specifically might be useful and in terms of concept and language, that would be very helpful moving forward. Thank you again for hanging in there.
Thank you, Gilbert. On deck, we have Verity Chager, sorry. And up now we have Thomas Marine. Thomas, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
I can't.
Thomas, I see you're unmuted, but yeah, we're having trouble hearing you. Okay, well, I'll come back to you, Thomas. Sorry, hopefully we can get the mic working in a couple of minutes. I'll move on for now. On deck, we have Kristen Vandenberg, but up now we have Verity Chager. Verity, feel free to unmute yourself. Please, again, state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Thanks again. It's Verity Chager from the ISSB coming back to share another thought here. Because Senator Stern mentioned the changes happening in Europe, we would like to suggest that CARB board and staff carefully monitor developments in the EU when considering implications of other jurisdictional requirements that entities subject to California 261 might also need to comply with. As you know, CARB's comment period closed on March 21, and as Senator Stern alluded to, on April 3, the EU Parliament voted to stop the clock on CSRD and undertake the omnibus proposal. This resulted in the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, or EFRAG, beginning work to revise and simplify ESRS, which comprised the reporting requirements for CSRD, with EFRAG's recommended changes due by the end of October. However, we are encouraged by public comments from the European Commission, which oversees EFRAG, and EFRAG's technical expert group, which confirm Europe is committed to maintaining or enhancing interoperability with ISSB standards. I also wanted to reflect on a few of the additional comments today in the practical challenges raised by others during this workshop. So ISSB has elevated the TCFD recommendations to standards suitable for regulatory mandate and assurance. And we've addressed challenges like Scope 3 data lag across the value chain, treatment of parents and subsidiaries, as well as JVs and associates, and climate scenario analysis. We also have a concept and definition of materiality. We look forward to continuing to provide technical assistance to CARB, and I thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your depth of expertise and for sticking with us to do a round two to provide those additional comments. Really looking forward to continuing to work with you and yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Verity. We have, last but not least, Kristen Vandenberg. Kristen, feel free to unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and deliver your comment.
Hi, thank you. Kristen Vandenberg, resident of California. I have one additional comment and a question. With respect to the timeline and companies who may only qualify under 23101B subsection 4, the confirmation of the definition and/or exemption guidelines of doing business in California are critical to be received as soon as possible. Employers need to confirm continued employment of their remote work from home employees who are California residents. Otherwise, those jobs, including my own, are likely to leave California in advance of the definition or exemption guidelines becoming available if we have to wait until the end of the year. If the definition will not be available July 1st as originally published, is it possible to accelerate the timeline confirming the definition or whether exemptions will be available, possibly no later than Q2 of this year? Thank you.
Great, Kristen, and thank you for hanging on to stick with us to raise these additional issues. So one thing I want to take the opportunity to clarify is that in CARB speak, developing a regulation by the end of the year is part and parcel with having a continued stakeholder process throughout that year. So CARB doesn't necessarily go dormant or start talking. In fact, the opposite is true. There'll be lots more opportunities to continue engaging with us. And just a ask for help as we continue moving forward with the process. A lot of these asks in terms of refining our definition around doing business in California and revenue is going to be really dependent on what we hear back from you all and the information that we're able to receive and incorporate. We've put out staff's initial concept based on the work that we've done, based on the comments we've received in the public docket, but now it's really where the rubber hits the road. We need your help refining and making sure that these definitions, serve the purpose that is needed. So a lot of our timeline will be dependent on, hearing from you all as well. And of course, we will continue to release information and thinking as it becomes available. So when we say developing a regulation by the end of the year, that certainly doesn't mean that we go dark and you stop hearing from us. The opposite's true. So with that, I want to say thank you to all of you for participating today. We feel, at least based on the rumor mill, that today's attendance has broken CARB's record. So congratulations to all of you for being part of this momentous day, at least from staff's perspective. I would think it is really crucial that we all continue to engage with each other, and I appreciate all the thoughtful input we've received today. It's really critical to shaping these policies and providing, the clarity that we all need to move forward. And as a reminder, any correspondence or feedback that you provide to us in CARB, including what you share today or in writing afterwards to our climatedisclosure.arb.ca.gov email, is considered public record. And we will post, the materials that we receive via email online, which really helps us ensure transparency as we move forward in developing regulations. And a final plea, please take a look at the follow-up questions we referenced earlier in the workshop. And in addition to the draft or initial staff thinking and concepts that we put out, your responses are critical, whether you share them today or share them afterwards. This is going to be a very important part as we all move forward. So with that, I want to thank all of you and all of the staff behind the scenes and on mic today who made today's such a success. Looking forward to continue working with all of you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.